Shelley.
I will.
Rebecca,
Of course, if it comes from
those
me,
Yeah,
you
I
might.
would say,
and I was so
would that do me
excited.
any good?
Yeah.
I don't remember what. I CC'd you also. Volunteer at the airports now with the Freedom Center, which is for veterans.
The short part, push the short part
Here you go,
forward,
sir.
the back part off.
Oh, what it was, Macomb now has a new navigator. Wayne's navigator was there.
Good job. Jeez. Hi, Vijay.
Well, it is now that you broke it.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our board meeting and invite you to join the board in the Pledge of Allegiance.
And there's no comma after.
Of the United States of America and to the republic
For which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible.
with liberty and justice for all.
May we have roll call?
Mrs. Summers. Dr. Hans. Here. Mrs. Raspecki. Here. Dr. Arrington.
Here.
Ms. Newman. Here. Dr. Taub.
Here.
Dr. Klotz.
Here.
Ms. Schulman.
Here.
Mr. Rubin. Ms. Kucharik. Mr. Landsman.
Here.
Mr. Furman.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is our first opportunity for public comment, and I have Jenny Brown listed. She would like to speak. Oh, please come forward.
Nathan, if you want to stand, you can. It's up to you.
Good evening.
Thank you for allowing us the chance to speak. I wanted to address development. Oh, you can't hear me? I move a lot when I talk. There we go. As I said, I wanted to address issues surrounding community integration and workforce development. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I am the CEO and co-founder of Dutton Farm, which is an organization that provides supports to adults with developmental disabilities. And so I wanted to come here today and not just speak on behalf of the individuals that are in our program, but I wanted to speak with some of my friends who have been in our program and are now competitively employed in the community. I know that we've come a long way as a state, just like heroes before us that some of you may have been involved in, the deinstitutionalization movement that is so important, and then the amazing parents that promoted inclusion in the schools. Well, now it's time to carry that same mentality and ambition and belief in employment and community engagement, community inclusion. And before I get into any more of that, I want my friends to introduce themselves and to tell this lovely group of people who you are
Okay.
and where you work.
I'm Jimmy Dynamic. I work at Dutton Farm. I came from Friday. I got a job right away. Demi Cooling. I just love that place. And Michelle, Jane's brother, got me a job. And a lot of people think Dutton Farm is no place. Just people need to get a job someplace. People are special. You don't think about all these groups right here. We're part of a Dutton Farm. We got a place in the community we'll get jobs going.
All right, now let Nathan say his. Great job, Jimmy. All right,
Nathan from Detroit, Michigan.
Nathan from Detroit, Michigan. Precision Irrigation. So Nathan came to our program, and we got to know him, and he became our joke of the day guy, and he became our egg man, and we started to learn his passion for landscaping, and after a couple of years was able to be employed fair and square in the community at Precision Irrigation, where they love him. He's an asset to the community, an asset to the place of employment, and receives paycheck, which is important. And then here we have a very good friend of mine. His name is Travis Avery, has been in our program about a year, and Travis was recently employed at Powers Distribution, where he works in their recycling plant. So I thought it was really important for you guys to be able to meet some of these amazing individuals, because it's one thing when I say it, but not only do people with all types of ability levels, not only are they able to work, these are talented, amazing human beings that have overcome challenges, they want to work, and they are working competitively, integrated in the community, and it's working. And so I urge you not to see this final rule as a cumbersome problem or chore, but to see it as an opportunity to set the standard as a county and as a state to the rest of the nation of how inclusion and workforce development can be done and can be done well, not just for a certain group of people with disabilities, but all ability levels. And we have an army of people. We have employers beating our door down to hire more people. We have staff members pouring their heart and soul into workforce development. It's not just me. We have staff members willing to raise any extra funds where we fall short, to not just do it because we have to check it off the list because that's what legislation is telling us to do, because these individuals matter, and it's worth our effort and our fight and our heart and soul. So that's what I wanted to say.
Well, thank you so much. That was an unexpected presentation. It was great to meet all of you and to know about your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good job, Jim.
Would anyone else like to make public comment at this time? Well, we do have another opportunity at the end of the meeting. May I have a motion to suspend the rules and approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second? It's been moved by Ms. Newman, seconded by Ms. Respecki. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes approval of the board minutes of August 21st, approval of the CAC minutes of August 15, and approval of the RRAC minutes of August 2nd? I'm sorry, who was that? Ms. Kuchera?
So moved.
Second. Okay, it's been moved by Ms. Koncharik, seconded by Dr. Klotz. Any discussion? Of course, Ms. Newman.
Weren't we supposed to start including the committee of the whole meeting minutes
No, we did last time. I guess we
in with
forgot.
this?
Sorry.
Okay.
Ken, do you have committee of the whole minutes? No. Okay, perhaps we can approve them at the next board meeting? Okay. So thank you for pointing that out. And any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. So we're moving right into our second presentation, actually, Community Living Services Oakland presentation. And that's Lisa and Tyler. Good evening.
Good evening. Well, my name is Lisa Beline, and I am the Executive Director of Community Living Services, our Oakland County Division. And I have as a co-presenter today Tyler, who is also the owner of Tyler's Bottles. Tyler's Bottle Service, and his mom Rhonda, who's here for moral support. I don't think Tyler needs it, but I do, so I'm thankful for that. All right. So I'm happy to be here to share a little bit about community living services with you all. I reviewed the presentation that CLS provided last year, and I thought, well, I don't want to repeat everything that Annette at that time had shared, and she had done a lot of the presentation about person-centered planning and self-determination, which are two of the things that we very much pride ourselves on and things that we think we do well. But I thought I would highlight a few other things about us and some areas where we think we are leaders in different areas. So we are located in Ferndale, our main office, but we do serve people with intellectual and developmental disabilities all over Oakland County, and we serve people of all ages. Our mission, and this is one of the few slides I will read to you, but it kind of makes sense to read the mission. So the mission of Community Living Services is to assist and advocate for each person to have the supports they want and need, to exercise control and authority over their lives, to live a life of freedom, opportunity, and relationships as family, friends, and neighbors, and to share in full community membership and citizenship. One of the areas where we think we have some leadership locally and maybe even statewide are around self-determination arrangements and people having individual budgets where they understand the services and the cost of those services. Conflict-free case management. We very much work towards people maintaining their full rights as citizens versus having a guardian appointed for them. And we support them in decision-making approaches or other alternatives to guardianship. We believe in tenancy rights. We believe that people should live in their personal homes, not in congregate living arrangements. And we also believe very strongly in income generation, in integrated jobs in the community. We currently serve 822 people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Many of those folks also have a co-occurring mental health issue, so we do serve quite a diverse group of people. The 822 people we serve, 14% or 118 of them are children, and 86% or 704 of them are adults. That's probably primarily because of Medicaid eligibility, would be the reason for that. Interestingly, nearly 2/3 of the people we support are male. Only 37% are female. 56 people who currently have active services for applied behavioral analysis, also known as ABA. There are about 72 people who are actually in the process of receiving ABA services, but these 56 people are currently getting services right this moment. But the difference in the numbers is because there are people who are currently going through the intake process. They've not actually engaged in services, but they've been found eligible and they're somewhere in process. Or some people who there are services available for them, but they have chosen to wait for a different service provider or a service provider who can provide home-based services versus services in a clinic or something like that. So there's a little bit of difference in the numbers there, but 56 people are currently engaged at this point in time. I thought this was another interesting statistic. 28.7% of the people we serve have a diagnosis of autism or Asperger's. I thought that was a pretty high number. I know that the incidence of autism is very high, but so are a lot of other diagnoses we see, so I thought it was very interesting that it was this high of a number. We believe very strongly, I'm going to kind of go through those different areas where I think that we lead. We believe very strongly in all the principles of self-determination. We try to apply those principles in all of the services we provide to people on a daily basis. What that really comes down to is funding people, not programs. We don't have like a program that we're trying to fill. What we try to do is listen to people, hear what they want, and then figure out what makes sense for them and what are the services that fit their life. So we don't have slots we need to fill. It's all about just coming up with an individual set of services for each and every unique individual. We don't believe in buildings, we believe in jobs. Lots of those jobs may be in buildings, but we would hope those buildings are at a doctor's office, a hospital, a mall, a restaurant, whatever the case may be. So we don't have any infrastructure in terms of service arrangements that we need to worry about. We believe that people should be in the community, not in congregated settings. People should be interacting with everyone else in the world and become a natural part of our very interesting fabric of different people getting to know each other and people, learning mutual respect for one another in the community. And of course, that leads to integration versus segregation. Segregation is not right for any population, nor is it right for the population we're happy to serve. So this comes down to viewing services differently. We think that people need to know how much their services cost so that they can really understand whether or not what they're receiving is of good value to them. So if you know how much is being paid to someone who is providing a service to you, you can decide if you are making a prudent purchase of those services and whether those Medicaid dollars are being used wisely, or if there might be a different service that might work better for you. And this helps shift the control from the system really to people and their families so they can make the decisions and determination of what works best in their life. The way it kind of works as people come in for services and throughout the time they're being served is that they identify their goals and needs with their support circle at the time of their person-centered plan. And once they identify what their goals are, then they can figure out what services they need to help them meet their goals. And then they can choose different service providers from within our available network of providers. So then those independent entities, those provider agencies, or independent support coordinators enter into a contract directly with each individual. Rather than being contracted by us or being our employees, they directly contract with the individual in order to provide the services, and they have an agreement that outlines their roles, their responsibilities, expectations, fees, etc. Invoices and timesheets that are reviewed with the person. So let's say someone has a staff person who works with them. The person who is being supported will look at the timesheets and say, yep, these are the hours that were worked. I'm authorizing that for payment. I agree that that happened. And then that payment is issued through a fiscal intermediary. And then every month, each person receives a report of the dollars that were spent so they can see not just how much money it was, but they can also make sure that that happens. So let's say they didn't have a service, but a cost shows up, then they know that there may be something that needs to be questioned. Is that because there is a late timesheet from a month before, or is there something else that they need to look into? And that helps us with the integrity of the services and the billable claims. This is really a graphic depiction of what I was just talking about. So the circle of support is what helps a person, just like we all have circles of support in our lives as they develop their person-centered plan. And that process then informs the individual plan of service, which will outline the services that will be provided to the person to help them meet their goals and get their needs met. And from that comes the individual budget. And then once the budget is in place and the services are being provided, the dollars flow through the fiscal intermediary to pay each of the entities that are providing the services. And the support coordinator is there to assist the person really throughout every step of this process and to help them understand those reports that come in each month and things like that. We think that this transparency of costs helps take the mystery out of a publicly funded service system such as Medicaid. I think that it's very difficult to take all the mystery out of it because I think even those of us who work in this field day to day know that it's a complicated system, and sometimes when we're trying to simplify it for people, we realize it's almost ridiculous to try to simplify Medicaid, but we do our best to make it make sense for people. We really want to help people understand what their services cost so they make informed decisions about the value of their services. So of the 822 people we currently support, 100% of those people have self-determination arrangements. We really do believe that every single person has the right to self-determination, and whatever someone's set of circumstances or their abilities are, we are able to help them through this process. Some people have very strong circles of support who work with them. Some people do this very, very independently. Wherever someone is, that's where we will meet them to help them have this opportunity. So our network of services that I referenced earlier, we have 2 fiscal intermediaries, so people certainly have a choice of their fiscal intermediary. We have 21 staffing agencies, 5 employment skill building agencies, and 12 behavioral health providers. All of these agencies have individuals who can go out and meet with someone so that they can select. So if someone wants a staffing provider, they can also choose to direct hire someone themselves. They don't have to go through an agency. That's another option for them. But if they are looking for an agency, they meet with the folks at those agencies and find out, how do you run your operation? Do you seem like someone who I would want in my life? What is your system? And they can ask whatever questions they might like and choose. And the same goes for all of the services we provide. It's always choice-based. We don't make assignments. Unless someone comes and says, I just give me somebody right now, I need something right now, we can obviously accommodate those sorts of things. Because sometimes people don't know what they're ready to ask for because they haven't experienced it yet. So whatever works for folks. Conflict-free case management is obviously something that is becoming more and more important around the state. We have a network of 71 independent support coordinators from whom people can choose their support coordinator. And again, people interview from within this network, and if they choose someone and they decide somewhere along the line they would like someone else, they're able to, at any point in time, interview and select someone new. We also have the ability, not just with support coordinators, but with all of the other service providers, if someone knows of someone who is a willing and able agency or individual who can provide a service, we are always willing to credential someone new into our network. So if someone says, I've heard of this agency, they're in a different county, would you be willing to work with them? We can certainly credential them so we will add to their choice. And then sometimes those people become available for other folks as well. So of our 822 people we support, only 17% have a legal guardian. That's 17% probably too many, but I think that we're on the right track with 83% of people retaining their full rights of citizenship, because we do really believe that everyone should have the rights, privileges, and responsibilities of full citizenship. We believe strongly in the rights of tenancy and personal homes, not congregate living. So that means that we do not have any group homes. Every single person we support signs their own lease or lives in their own home or lives with their family. It means in a beautiful way that 100% of everyone we support their living arrangement is compliant with the home and community-based settings final rule, because we don't have any group homes or any of those other things that might be under heightened scrutiny or anything like that. We also believe very strongly in integrated community-based employment. We believe that people should have individualized community-based services, which means that we should hear what people want to do, how they would like to make money. We don't necessarily ask people if they want to work, we ask what they would like to do, because that's what most adults are accustomed to, that most of us need to work in order to participate in our economy and in our world. So we don't make referrals to sheltered workshops or building-based programs. Instead, we learn what things people would like to do, and then we help people either develop their own business, which Tyler will talk about, or find employment someplace in the community. This is important because as a culture, as we meet people out in the world, you go to a party, you go to any event, and you're meeting new people, how often is it that as we meet people, we say, so, what do you do? It's just a cultural norm. And I challenge people to think about whether or not the people they know in their lives who have disabilities can answer that question the same way as other people without disabilities. And I think that we have to make sure that we don't do a disservice to people by not having the same expectation of people, because work does matter. It matters because it gives us our sense of identity. I think that when people ask me, well, what do you do? I say, I'm a social worker. And I don't even say, well, I work at this place or I do social work, but I say I am. It's a part of who I am. It's a part of my identity. And it gives everyone a sense of self-worth, sense of responsibility, and certainly social contacts. I know that I spend far more time with my coworkers than I do with anyone else in my life. And I think it's fair to say that many, many of us meet friends and other social contacts in our work environment, because that is how our culture operates. And I think when people don't have the opportunity to be a part of the workforce, that also creates more social isolation. And we don't want to do anything that creates loneliness and isolation. And of course, it can contribute to self-sufficiency or at least some added income, which nobody ever really minds. Historically, our system paid for buildings. They paid to maintain segregated workshops where people went and often did work that didn't have a lot of meaning. Many of us who've been around for a long time, like myself, have seen people doing things that were just routine tasks, like separate, these nuts from these bolts, and, one person we support tells it very well. She went through the process of separating all these different things by size, and she thought, well, maybe someone's going to bag them up and sell them in groups of 10 or whatever they're going to do. And at the end of her workday, after she spent all day separating these things, the staff came over and they went, would all be ready for her to do again the next day. And those are the kind of things that we don't want to see happen. So that's a lot of why we're so driven to find people actual, real, meaningful work in the community at minimum wage. Our goal is to continue to increase the number of folks we support who have integrated employment at a competitive wage. And that also means that that work is done alongside other people, hopefully people who don't have disabilities, so it's not segregated. So these are our numbers. We have, and wow, those are really hard to read on there. I apologize for that. But our numbers at the end of fiscal year 17 were 40%, 40.44, I believe that says. And so far in fiscal year 18, we're at 39.56. So we have fallen off a little bit. However, I still feel very good about that percentage of people having employment or generating income. This is comparing us to our peers here in this county. We are the green line, the green bar, so I think that we are doing well in comparative terms, but we want to get better. We want to keep on working towards improving, and I'm hoping that our numbers will look better at the end of fiscal year 19 than our slight decrease of 1%. So we believe that all people should be served in the community of their choice, by the people of their choice, and supporting them to meet the goals they have identified in whatever their dreams are for the future. So it really is about listening. It's not about saying, well, you need services, we have a slot over here that we need to fill, and we're going to hope that works for you. But it's really about, well, where are your friends? Where's your job? Where's your family? How can we make that work? How do we help you find affordable housing? How do we help you find the supports you need to live in that apartment that you've identified? So it is truly people's choice, everything about their services. With the integration into communities, we also want to make sure that we're not slipping into the outings model that many of us might remember from the past, where people would go on outings, often 6 people in a van with a couple of staff going into a community activity of some sort. Because if you go anywhere with a group of 6 to 8 people, you're unlikely to meet anybody else besides your group, because you've now become an inclusive, insular group of your own. But if people are going out and joining activities that they want to be involved in and getting to know people by going back, maybe making a contribution to the community in some way, that is how they will become an actual community member and a part of their community where people know them, and they'll miss them when they're not there, and they will make friends. There's so many different ways that you can do that. You could join a political organization, play a sport, take a class, join a church or a temple. There are so many different options for people, and it really, what we need to do is be asking people, well, what is your interest? Because if people go someplace to meet people, but they don't have any interest in, if I went to a club that was about movies, no one would want to talk to me because I can't tell you the last time I saw a movie. It would be really boring for me, and people would not find me interesting and want to be my friend. But if I went to a club where we talked about skiing, we could talk about that all day long. So we need to listen, hear what people like to do, and then connect them with other people in the community who have similar interests so that they make the natural relationships in a very natural way. And I think that one of the things we have to always remember is that if we underestimate people, they will live up to that expectation. But if we set high expectations, they will also live up to that expectation. So we always want to encourage people to be their best, presume competence all the time, every time, and assume that we just have to figure out how we can best support someone to meet whatever it is their identified goals and dreams are. And before we go to Tyler, I wanted to see if anyone had any questions of me, or if you would like to hear from Tyler first, who's going to talk about not employment. He's going, I left it out of my presentation so Tyler could talk about, but Tyler started his own business, so that's a little bit different than the typical employment we talked about.
First of all, thank you for an excellent presentation. It's good to hear how you've organized and how you are proceeding to ensure that people have employment, and enjoy their community. Are there questions for Lisa? Yes, Ms. Newman.
I just have one. Thank you for the presentation. It was very good. But when you're talking about employment, it's challenging anyway for everybody, and I'm just wondering how you overcome some of the challenges like transportation and some of the other things that make it difficult for everybody to get employed.
Transportation is obviously an ongoing challenge for everything we talked about. It's a challenge for people to access their communities, not just because, for their jobs. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to make choices or help people make choices that make sense. So if you need public transportation, it makes sense to live near a public transit. It makes sense to live in a community that still supports public transit and perhaps close to a bus line. We have to get creative sometimes about how people can get to their jobs, but we sometimes have to help people look for jobs where they have those opportunities. It doesn't make sense to look for a job in Rochester if you live in Highland Park or like South Lyon, because you're probably not going to find transportation to do that. And nobody likes a long commute anyway. So those kind of challenges are real, and we do have to address them. And that's probably what holds a lot of people back from getting employment.
Additional questions? I was just curious about the fiduciary. You said you have two. Are these private citizens? Are they CPA firms, accountants? What?
Well, so they are accounting entities, essentially. So one is called GT Independence, and the other one is called Personal Accounting Services. So the people who operate them, that is their role, is to, they almost operate more like a human resources and payroll department, because they have to understand, how to pay FICA, SUTA, all the taxes, and so they handle all of those things that we would typically have a payroll department handle for us. So sometimes they are started by people who are accountants, but they could also be people who have more expertise in payroll in general.
Thank you. Additional questions? Then let's hear from Tyler.
This is where it gets better.
I'll just speak. Hello, members of the board. My name is Tyler of Tyler's Bottle Service. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak in front of you tonight. What I do is I collect people's I go to people's homes and businesses and collect their Michigan deposit cans and bottles. I take them back to the store and give the customers half their money back, 5 cents back if I ever can, and I keep the other half as a fee. I have no additional upfront costs. I was born 24 weeks gestation at 1 pound 5 ounces on September 22nd, 1992. Spent 100 days in the hospital in incubator at Bronson's Children's Hospital in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and I have autism and cerebral palsy. I graduated from Lakeland High School in 2011 and graduated from Michigan Career and Technical Institute in Plainwell in 2013 in retail management. I started it 5 years ago in August of 2013. When I started the company, I had to hand out many flyers. I had to go around handing 500 flyers. I would also start my Facebook page and would get like around eventually get to like 100 likes, and the whole start was building the infrastructure, you know, like getting people aware of this service. The business would eventually take off, though, of course. And initially, what I did was have count the money on site, but I have since moved to giving the customers their money back via either check or PayPal. And my Facebook page would eventually hit over 3,000 likes. I have over 2,000 in my mailing reserve list. Which is, like I mentioned, I celebrated 5 years this past August, and earlier this year like I also mentioned, my Facebook page over 3,000 likes, 2,000 list members on the Facebook, on the email. I have also won numerous awards and have made in the Alice Souls.
That's right. Yep. Advocacy Award.
What was that?
Advocacy Award.
Advocacy Award from CLS. I have also won the Ted Lindsay Sergey Foundation Sergey Fedorov Courage Award, and I just won the Director's Award from Oakland County Community Health, I think it is?
Oakland Community Health.
Yeah, Oakland Community Health. So, from you guys, yeah. I did it a few weeks ago. Yeah, I'm just trying to remember, sorry. I have also made appearances in the news, in various media, newspapers like the Oakland Press, Spinal Column. I was also on WXYD Channel 7, interviewed by Stephen Clark 3 years ago, and was part of the Detroit Life radio podcast interview earlier this year. Future goals for me is to continue promoting my business. What I've also done is mentored other people into doing business, into doing their own bottle services, because as I would grow, I would get too big, have farther distances to drive. What this does is allows customers in farther areas like Rochester Hills or even Troy or St. Clair Shores to have someone who's closer to them in their area that can do it. And also, one thing we're looking at is eventually getting into a recycling center of our own with help from things like people like Tamra or the various distributors, and to help those with disabilities help with the job as well. Not like one of those shop things or anything, but
Just set up your own system.
yeah, set up my own system where I can just do it on site without. Yeah, I'm telling you a little stuff.
It's okay. It's fine.
And I'm so quick. Well, yeah, like I mentioned, the future goal is to also support a separate page on Facebook called MI Bottle Service Providers, which links up the various independent-run bottle support companies I have helped mentor. I mentored around over 13 people. What I would want to do is help promote them in their respective areas, and in addition to supporting my own business in my own area. Why I don't, instead of just saying that I should just franchise it, like a McDonald's. No, I want people to enjoy what they do. Just like how I enjoy doing this. Like, what am I going to do? Charge a penny for a franchise fee? That old one. Because one of my first people I mentored, Joy, Brett, he once said that he can't be fired because he owns his own business. That is true. That is why I don't want them to be contractors for Tyler's Bottle Shows. I want them to be able to enjoy the business. I want them to enjoy being their own person, their own boss, you know. I want that, them to be happy. And on this last slide is the info for my business, which the link directs me to your Facebook, to my Facebook page on Tyler Bottle Shows, and on the bottom of that is the company email. Again, I thank you for coming today, and again, thank you for letting me speak tonight.
Tyler, congratulations. Congratulations on such a successful business. And I mean, really, it's a business we all need because we all are collecting these bottles. Lisa, did you have anything further you wanted to add at this time?
I don't think so. I just want to thank Tyler for coming. One of the things that impressed me the most about Tyler was, well, one, his business sense, which is quite good. But also, he's very, very deliberate about making sure that he can help other people have a business of their own and that they can have that pride of owning their own business. And he's so willing to share. And so many people would want to just grow their own business. And when his business got too much for him to handle because he had such a good product, you know, good service for people, that he decided to mentor other people to be as successful. And I think that's laudable. So.
Really is. Questions or comments? Ms. Newman?
That was phenomenal, Tyler. Very, very inspirational. And I just wonder how you came up with the idea for the business.
Not long after I graduated from MCTI, I was struggling to find a job, and I had help from one of my previous sport coordinators, Eric Black, and one of my household chores was taking care of the bottles and cans in our house. So what Mom realized eventually was she had a can, another can for me to take care of, and realized if I don't like doing this, other people probably won't either. She said it, true story.
Any additional?
Sorry. And also, Eric Black, who was my previous sport coordinator, was a little skeptical about this working, but this was 5 years ago, and as I mentioned, it's done pretty well.
When he was skeptical, though, what did he say when you brought it up?
He was like, we'll give it a try. Yep, like I said, just give it a try, and that little try.
I think a lot of businesses have started that way. Let's just see what happens. Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you so much, Tyler, and thank you, Lisa. Wonderful presentation. Next, we have our July financials. Anya? Good evening, Anya.
Hello. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be nearly as entertaining. I always get put after like the really good people, and then I always have the numbers. It's like, all right. Okay, what you're looking at is July financials, and that is now 10 months into the fiscal year. So at this point in the year, when we get to revenues and expenses, we'll kind of start to look at it more focusing on year to date, because we're far enough in now to really see the trends and see kind of what the year is looking like. But I want to have you first start with the comparative statement of net position. And as we've talked about, the last few months of the fiscal year, we'll see some significant increases. The actual document. Keep going. We'll see the increase from the supplemental budget adjustment that was done. So you'll see that when we get to revenue. But if we look at just the statement of net position, you'll see cash and cash equivalents is roughly the same as last month, despite the payments that came in and went out, and et cetera. Investments is just slightly down. I think we had one payout of one particular investment. And once we start to get a better situation with cash going into next year, we'll probably stop the liquidation process in its entirety. Right now, we're just letting them mature as they do. The cash comes to us. So eventually, we'll stop that whole process when we're a little more comfortable with how much cash is on hand. But we like to make sure, as we've talked about, we have enough on hand. Should providers need anything, we're able to do that for them. Moving down to building and capitalized leased homes, all of those you see continue to recognize depreciation. So you see those values continue to decrease, and that's just the depreciation happening over each month. And moving down to current liabilities, you see vendors and provider payable. Those have gone up. And those are listed in the explanations as just accruals for vocational providers and some of the other things we start to see as we get closer to year end. We start to see people try to start to get stuff in before the year end close. What you do see there for community hospitals is that continued increase in the expense. We've seen a bit of an uptick in hospitalizations, both in the admissions and in the length of stay. Particularly as it relates to state facility admissions, there's a bit of a backlog of trying to get people into a couple of them. So we've seen, in addition to the length of stay on some stays, that has caused an increase in the expense. Moving down to non-current liabilities, you see the mortgage note payable go down again this month. As you know, we do pay more than the minimum payment on every month on this building. So you'll see that hit both non-current liabilities and current liabilities. And finally, going down to subtotal net position, you see go down again. Again, that's primarily based on the fact that we were utilizing deficit spending in this fiscal year to cover the transition into the new service models and the change in rate consistency across the other provider networks. Anybody have any questions on the statement of net position before I move on to revenue?
I don't see any, so.
Oh, moving on to revenue, you see there's where I talked about Medicaid revenue being up this month. It was about $1.9 million. You're seeing the net of that going on there, the 1.2. And then you also see Healthy Michigan revenue up a bit for this month. Again, you're going to see that for July, August, and September due to that supplemental budget adjustment. Moving down to general fund, what you're seeing going on there is the recognition of deferred revenue that our auditors had preferred us to defer some of the general fund revenue we received on a COFR, County of Financial Responsibility exchange, and we had to defer it into fiscal year 18, so that's what you're seeing going on here is us recognizing that revenue, so it moved from deferred revenue to actual revenue in fiscal year 18. Down to other, what you see going on there is just timing issues with some of those smaller accounts. OBRA reimbursement is a fee-for-service where we bill in monthly batches, and then some of the other ones, you see SUD others, one I mentioned to you every month because we don't get that one on a 1/12 basis. We get those payments a couple times a year. You can see if we look at fiscal year to date, we're about 1.63% off from budget this year, so fairly close to where we plan to be at this point in the year, and should remain roughly there for the remainder of the fiscal year. Do you have any questions on
Mr.
revenue?
Landsman.
So the 1.63 is on the basis that we've also made some number of budget amendments as well.
Exactly.
So things change in the actuals, we're making changes to the budget. So
This is based on budget amendment 2, which would have been the last one that was approved by the board.
okay. And then, of course, because it's not a variance any longer, you're not necessarily reporting it out in the report earlier that lists some of the variances between Y budget and expense or budget and revenue, because it's not out of whack now.
Yeah, we try to shore those up a bit each time we do a budget amendment, so if we know of any material changes, we would have adjusted that in a budget amendment. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Any other questions? Okay.
Moving on to expenses. So if you look at administration, you'll see It's slightly over for the month, but year-to-date, we're almost exactly on budget. We had a couple of payments that were doubled up in this month. I think our PCE payment, there was 2 made in this month as opposed to 1 made in the month. That's just a timing issue. In addition to that, we had that film production expense that was in making those films that we just completed not too long ago, so that hit this month. So that's the things that you're seeing that are causing it to be over for the month, but you can see year-to-date, we're almost exactly on budget. Moving down to core provider adults, what you see, that's slightly over budget for the month, and that's the final payments of the direct care wage pass-through that we pushed through. We had some providers that didn't make the cutoff for the original round, and so we gave them another opportunity to catch up and get their data in and then push that final payment out in July. So you're seeing that in there as well as payment on jail services contract that was signed later in the fiscal year. So that's why that one's a little over. As I mentioned, community hospitals, you see that expense is over budget. As I mentioned, that's just due to increased utilization that we're currently looking into. Vocational is over budget both for the month and for year-to-date, and that primarily is due to the budgeting that we did where the first quarter was not budgeted with vocational and non-vocational for their expense, but we did report it there, and that's just the difference in, because it broke through the fiscal year, because we didn't take on those until January. So you'll see all of that straighten out a bit in fiscal year 19. Moving down to housing, I do want to point that one out. That one is $135,000 over budget. That's due to the Oakland Housing Link. So if you recall, I think you guys got a presentation on that recently, if I'm recalling correctly. So that's just us starting to pay for that. So you'll see that hit for the next 3 months as well in fiscal year 18. So if you look again at fiscal year to date, we're just about 1%, just under 1% off from expenses. Again, we would expect that at this point in the fiscal year, and then what we are starting to go into is our year-end processes at this point, where we start to make estimates on where we expect everyone to be at year-end, and some of the year-end closing processes will begin at this point, along with the budgeting for next fiscal year. Does anyone have any questions?
Dr. Taub.
Anya, on the housing services, if I'm thinking, is this the same thing that Mark wanted it right now and you said you were going to put it in? That's something different?
No, that was the bond
Okay.
thing, so that's separate. This is the, okay.
Questions? Ms. Newman?
Housing link, was that something that was brought to us for approval?
Yep, was.
Okay, I couldn't remember.
Yep.
Thank you.
I don't see any others right now. That concludes this presentation, but I think you're going to be joined by Kathleen.
Yep.
Hello, Kathleen.
Hello. Tonight, we're seeking approval of the fiscal year 19 annual plan and budget, which is scheduled to begin October 1st. That's the beginning of our fiscal year. We've had several thorough presentations. We had a public forum presentation the end of August and a committee of the whole presentation on the 17th of September. So since that time, there really have been no changes made to at least the goal and objective section of the annual plan. At the Committee of the Whole, there was a discussion of new rates that were received from the department, and Anya had talked about updating the budget and finance section to reflect some of those changes. So I'm actually going to turn this over to Anya before we seek board approval.
As I mentioned before, as you guys are aware, we do this budget back in late July, early August, and without rates. So at the time we draft this original budget, they're educated guesses at best at that point without knowing rates. the department or any changes to the methodology being used. So fortunately for us, this fiscal year, we did receive the rate certification letters a little over a week ago now. And so we had the opportunity to run those rates through our revenue projection models. And as I mentioned before, it was favorable compared to the budget we had projected. So the main difference that we saw in the rates that we had projected versus what we received was the trending factor. And you guys have heard me talk about the extremely complex methodology used to develop rates. One of the things is a trending factor where they adjust from the original base year going forward into later fiscal years. And so what we were told when we received the supplemental $60 million for the DAB adjustment was that there would be a 2.5% trending factor for the fiscal year 19 rates. So that is what we built into our budget. In actuality, it was more between 5 and 7.5% from what we can tell. So what we've done in this budget is to make some small adjustments to the revenue projection at this point. And then as we go into the fiscal year, I'm always hesitant to make major adjustments to anything before we actually see the money start to come in, because they always have the opportunity to modify them, and there could be adjustments to factors that we didn't necessarily account for. So we like to see a month or two of revenue come in to really say, okay, how much cash are we actually receiving? So what we did with this budget was adjust the Medicaid revenue by roughly $3 million. I just split it as an estimate between 2 million Medicaid and 1 million a Healthy Michigan. And so as we start to see revenue come in October and probably November, we will likely do an early budget amendment with a better prediction of what revenue should be. I do expect it to be slightly higher than that. I'm just not comfortable at this point putting in the full factor until we start to see the revenue come in. But what the important part about this is it does get us in total out of deficit spending. And that's really my point in adjusting it at this point, was to make sure that people understood that while this is certainly a good thing, there's still work we're doing as far as consistency in rates and efficiencies, but this does help with some of the deficit issues we've had in last fiscal year. And I think the department is dealing with the implications of both fiscal year 17 and now 18 of underfunding the system. So I'm very hopeful at this point that these rates will be what is used throughout the year. Plus, in January, we do expect an adjustment to the geographic factor, which, from what I can tell, is going to help as well. So that'll be another adjustment. We'll do another budget amendment because, again, until we see what happens with it, I can't really necessarily predict a lot of what the impact will be, but I do expect it to be favorable for Oakland. So I want to be able to answer any questions you all have related to that.
Mr. Landsman.
Thank you. I appreciate that you're being very conservative with keeping some of the, if you will, putting the money in the bank in terms of going from 2% to the 4% and not going to the 6 or 7%. I think that's a really prudent thing, so I thank you very much for that. I'm wondering, along with that same sense of it, what if we didn't do any amendments to the budget going through the whole year, and we just stick with the budget that we have, and if things change, we won't have to do an amendment to up the amount, and then doing another amendment to reduce the amount, because we're pretty much, this is where we think we are, this is where we should be, even if the state does something to us in January. I'm just wondering how you feel about that.
But we typically do budget amendments when we feel like there's a material adjustment, because we really use the budget to really state where we think we're going to be for the full year. So for me, and our auditors expect it, quite honestly, we're questioned if we're materially off from the budgeted amount, because it is our role is to make sure we're watching that and monitoring that, and that's what I do with the budget. So when I bring to you material variances and things like that, I'm only able to see that if we keep current on what our revenue and expense projections are. So it's really a tool for not only us, but everyone who were to look at our financial statements to see how we're doing based on what we thought, and that does change over the year, because the money changes, just different factors. I would love for it to stay consistent enough for us to not have to do amendments, but that's just not the reality.
And I agree with you in some ways about that. I just wonder about it, and I know this is not the place for a dialogue, but I just wonder sometimes, because this is where we think we're going to be for the whole year, and we know we've got extra money in that hopefully goes into the reserves, and hopefully the state doesn't cut back on us. This is where we think we are right now for the whole year. This is where we hope to be at the end of the year. I just wonder when we put an amendment in and it gets lost, the changes get lost.
Well, and one of the things we had started doing was showing you original budget and any subsequent amendments when we present that, so you can see where we started and where we've gone to throughout the fiscal year. And I think that was an intent to be able for you to compare kind of where we thought we were going to be initially. Again, because we do this really before having any solid information on rates, that's the struggle. If we were to do this closer to the actual date and have solid rates earlier, that would be easier. But again, when we have factors of things like eligibility trends that can change based on the economy and other things, we have, the minimum wage goes up again in January, so that's going to have an impact on the budget and things like that. So there's enough changing factors throughout the year that it would be hard for me to ever say I'd want to leave it, because I feel like it's not presenting all of the information we know at the time if we don't adjust it.
I think that's reasonable, and I know that we do have the minimum wage coming up. So the other question I have is, when we do our reporting, we're reporting actual versus budget. I wondered, what is the level of difficulty if we were also to do a year-over-year comparison?
From the prior year, I mean, we can. It's just, I believe it's just another report to run that would just need to be set up in our system.
A lot of us are on top of it, but a lot of us, in the community forget what we went through last year. Helps us see where we were, where we are, and where we're heading.
I can ask if that can be added, if you'd like to see that. Mm-hmm.
That would.
Additional questions? Do you have any further presentation before we ask for a motion?
We do not, unless there's other comments to the annual plan.
I was just going to wait until you said, is there a motion?
So you are done. Okay, may I have a motion to approve the FY annual plan and budget?
Make that motion?
Is there a second? It's been moved by Mr. Landsman, seconded by Ms. Kucharik. Is there any further discussion or questions? May we have a roll call vote?
Dr. Hans? Mrs. Raspacky?
Yes.
Dr. Arrington?
Yes.
Ms. Newman?
Yes.
Dr. Taub?
Yes.
Dr. Klotz?
Yes.
Ms. Schulman?
Yes.
Ms. Kucharik? Yes. Mr. Landsman?
Yes.
Mr. Furman?
Yes.
The motion passes. I hope you're happy.
We are. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Marquita Massey and Matt Owens, and to discuss Quality Assessment Performance Improvement Program.
Evening.
Hi, how are you?
Matt and I are here to speak to you about our QAPIP, the Quality Assessment Performance Improvement Program. What we're going to be presenting to you tonight is the FY18 QAPIP. This was mailed out to the board earlier this month to allow time for you to review prior to the meeting. Typically, we review the QAPIP with the board earlier in the year. This year was a little different because we had to make some adjustments to the QAPIP to ensure that we aligned with NCQA requirements. So we're a little bit delayed, but it's important that I want to stress that the QAPIP activity doesn't start or stop at any particular time. It's continuous. The quality structure remains in place. Our quality improvement committees don't stop and start at any specific time in the beginning of the year. At the end of the year, the quality committees do develop work plans and goals for the coming year. However, activity does not cease at any given time. What the QAPIP is a process of bringing together all the different quality activities that happen throughout the organization. It's required by CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicaid Services, and by our contract with the state. This slide speaks about the impact on persons served, and it specifically targets what is the QAPIP and why is it required. I spoke about it being the foundation of our QI program, and it includes the minimum components that must be in place in a quality improvement program. So the CMS sets those guidelines for us. We do have some latitude in adding additional items, but the requirements of the QAPIP, the minimum guidelines, set that. In regards to requirements for the board provides oversight in relation to actually approving the QAPIP. Throughout the year, the board receives periodic progress reports on the QAPIP. Some examples of that would be presentations that have been made to the Committee of the Whole on satisfaction surveys that were completed by the Michigan Consumer Evaluation Team that focused on access. We present performance reports on the performance indicators throughout the year. Staff have come to you presenting Service Network Team updates that focused on access, acute care, UMUR, and the use of dashboards. Earlier in this year, we also provided an update to the board on where we were with NCQA. I want to point out that there is alignment with our strategic plan and our annual plan in regards to the QAPIP. A couple of examples would be we have in our annual plan an objective to address provider network operations. We speak about our provider directory that's under development. That is a requirement for NCQA. That's we're adding on some finishing touches. Once that's up and ready to go, we will be coming to the board to give you a preview of that. And the other item that, as an example, I want to share with you and how the QAPIP aligns with our strategic plan and annual plan is the use of technology. We speak about data analytics. So those are a couple of examples just to show you how it all ties together. So again, the QAPIP is the foundation of our QI program. It includes the minimum components that have to be included, and it outlines specific elements that must be addressed. For example, the QAPIP requires that you have a process for reviewing sentinel events. It has requirements that you have UMUR requirements. It has requirements that you have opportunities for persons served to provide input on activities of the organization. So those are some examples that are included in the QAPIP of the specific elements that are included in the QAPIP. Moving on to policy and fiscal implications. I mentioned that it's supported by federal regulations, is required by our contract with the state, and the QAPIP that we'll be presenting probably in like November is going to show more alignment with NCQA. So that will be forthcoming. And the QAPIP is also evaluated annually by the External Quality Review Organization, which is the organization that the department contracts with to ensure that all the PIHPs are meeting all the federal regulatory requirements set out in the managed care rule. So our QAPIP will be evaluated with the review next year. This slide speaks about the required areas that NCQA requires that your quality plan address. It requires that your QAPIP addresses quality of clinical care, safety of clinical care, quality of services, and member experiences. This diagram here is a diagram of our quality structure and all the quality committees that we have in place to promote and to deliver the actions that are outlined in the QAPIP. So to tie our quality committees, with each of those 4 areas that NCQA requires, I want to just walk you through how our committees tie to that. So in the area of quality of clinical care, we have our QI Council Risk Committee. Our chairperson of that committee is our chairpersons are Dr. Rosen, Kathleen Kobach, and Matt Owens. One of the primary focus of that committee would be to review our progress on the HEDIS measures, any barriers that we are facing in regards to improving, and to review performance. Also in that category, we have our Improving Practices Leadership Team, which is the box all the way over to the left there. The Improving Practices Leadership Team consists of clinical leadership from the core provider agencies. This committee is responsible for the review and approval of our clinical protocols, and they provide input on the protocols prior to implementation. We also have under that category Integrated Healthcare Committee. This is the work group, basically, that reviews reports on the HEDIS measures. The membership consists of staff from the core provider agencies, and this group is also responsible for developing and implementing integrated care performance improvement projects at the local level. Under this category, as well as the Medical Directors Advisory Group, this is the committee that Dr. Rosen chairs. Membership consists of all the medical directors of the core provider agencies. This group is heavily tied in reviewing the HEDIS measures as well, discussing trends and action steps to be taken. In the category of safety of clinical care, our Quality Committee, Risk Committee also falls up under that category. One of the primary elements that this committee will be focusing on would be the identification and prioritization of risk areas for the organization and identifying action steps and root causes of issues that come to light that we need to address. The committee would also be looking at our performance on HEDIS measures. HEDIS measures and our performance on the HEDIS measures is a critical component in regards to us being successful with NCQA. In the area of quality of service, credentialing and privileging of staff fall into that area. It's important that we ensure that staff are properly trained, that they're free of sanctions, and that they're in good standing with the law, and that they are evaluated for performance. In the category of member experience, which is the 4th area on that scale that you saw that diagrammed, the NCQA areas, we have satisfaction surveys that apply to that. We have the 2 surveys that the department has been requiring us to do for the past few years, which is the Mental Health Statistics Improvement Project and the Youth Satisfaction Survey Function, I believe, the YSSF. New this year, we have the ECHO, which is an NCQA satisfaction survey that will be coming to the board to present outcomes on where we are with that. This area also requires that you are utilizing feedback from individuals served, and we get that information from our various quality committees. Specifically, we have a community evaluation and education committee and our citizens advisory committee, where we obtain input directly from persons served. Persons served also sit on other quality committees as well. So some of the changes that we were required to make to align with NCQA in our QUAPIP is that one area is that we needed to highlight the involvement more so of our medical director in QI activities. Our medical director is the chair of our Sentinel Event Review Committee. He is also the chair of our Medical Directors Advisory Group and also chairs our Outcomes Improvement Committee. So NCQA we have to be able to highlight that to show exactly how the medical director is involved in improving quality. So our QUAPIP does that. NCQA, the additional change that we had to make in regards to NCQA was to highlight the roles of staff and the credentials of staff that were performing certain aspects of the quality. We were required to provide more specifics on the HEDIS measures that we're going to be using. In FY18, we had identified 5 HEDIS measures that we were going to focus on. As a result of us delving more deeply into NCQA, we are now going to be measuring, at this time, 11 HEDIS measures. We will be providing baseline performance reports to the board when we present our FY18 summary year-end report and our FY19 report. We are also required to highlight all and put emphasis on the QI activity that's occurring throughout the organization. We're responsible for highlighting the role of the QI staff in developing the QIPIP, on-site monitoring, the initiation of PI projects, evaluating the effectiveness of root cause analysis, preparing the organization for external reviews, and policy management, coordination, and development. So those are some examples of what we were required to highlight in our QIPIP. We also had to provide more description in regards to what our complex case management program is. That is a new program that started earlier this year. The nursing staff provided a presentation to the board earlier this year. This program focuses on providing care coordination for individuals with multiple complex healthcare needs, individuals that have required multiple hospitalization. The nurses are working directly with those individuals to ensure that they get the proper care.
I'll be taking over from this part. And when Marquita talks about some of the changes that have occurred with NCQA, a couple things I'd like to highlight as well. Related to the committee structure that you talked about, one of the things that I always like about that when we've talked about it, it really tightened up the intercommunication between those committees such that those groups that communicated with one another to a degree, but now have much more of an evolved ability for that information to go between those committees to filter up to the board as the QAPIP and then filter back into a constant feedback loop. So each of those committee members has access and is informed about the happenings and the going on of the other committees. So it creates this constant feedback loop of the quality improvement movements and happenings within those other committees. It really has stepped it up a little bit. So the other thing, of course, I think that stands out with that is with the development of some of the committees, it really puts a tiered, demonstrates a tiered model where we're involving people from the network and folks that we serve, also is involving the provider network, and it involves our teams. So there's multiple different perspectives and input that's involved in the decisions and the quality development that we're working on, which I think is a good move for us. The things that we wanted to highlight, though, from last year, we wanted to focus on a few areas here. One of them is the Integrated Healthcare Committee, and some of the things that were developed out of there, including some of the assessments and protocols relative to the complex case management. Dr. Nicole Lawson has a lot of efforts involved in that and leads that. As Marquita had indicated, some of the work that's being done with that really is a big step, and it really helps to move us in the realm more so around integrated healthcare. Also, chronic healthcare conditions and educational material that's being disseminated and helps guide some of our practices to improve integrated healthcare as well. I think we stand pretty well and strong and be able to say that we are doing integrated healthcare within our system, and that's a good step for us. So, the other part is improving practices leadership team. Some highlights there that we wanted to talk about is review of protocols and care coordination protocols. And that group, and to recap, Marquita stated it, but this is, remember, folks within the provider network. So they're coming in and they're assisting with this information, helping to guide how that is being developed out. including assisting us with the service models and to promote evidence-based practices. So it really makes the provider network part of those decisions, part of the development of those service models so they can feel aligned, they have buy-in, and part of that process. We also, through that committee, had developed a trauma-informed policy that came out of there. And overall, I'll talk a little more in a moment about some other areas with trauma-informed care that we're trying to infuse more so within our system. The Medical Directors Advisory Group, Marquita spoke about that a little bit. We had developed a protocol for telemedicine. We had had a couple of providers that have talked about telemedicine use in our network, and that's increasing. There's some other things that we're going to be talking about probably within the coming months here that will highlight some other initiatives that we're looking to do with telemedicine. One thing that we're working on particularly is with Common Ground and trying to have telemedicine agreements with some of the hospitals. That's been something we've struggled with, and we think we're getting some headway. So more to come on that. But the telemedicine protocol was developed by that group, as well as looking to select the HEDIS measures and providing periodic reports that are going to be provided out of that. Those decisions help to guide and influence the practice within our system. Feedback, of course, on the service models, which is ongoing, and aiding any ongoing development of those models. So the other area, I'd like to emphasize, we always value and look for opportunities to have feedback and input from persons we serve. And the Community Evaluation and Education Committee is one of those areas. We do it through other methods. We have community forums and surveys and things like that. But the CEEC is one of those areas, and they do provide information for us. And through this process, Marquita had talked about feedback through the provider directory. They had done so and provided that feedback, which is very helpful. And feedback on the annual plan, person-centered planning, use of peers in our system, which of course they were very much proponents for, and alternatives to guardianship. So we work with them closely and try to get them involved in the decision-making. Looking at next steps, as Marquita indicated, when you look at next steps on an ever-evolving process, it's always something that's in motion. And so this is a never-ending, ongoing process, and really quality improvement always should be. So we do keep the core items for the QAPIP always on hand, and those will continue. But this is a process that is ever-changing, and some things will affect what we're going to have in the QAPIP. Changes to NCQA, as we had spoke about a bit. That has impacted the QAPIP, and likely will continue to affect it to some degree as we move forward. New requirements that are added as a result of our contract with MDHHS, or priorities that evolve out of work that we're doing. We're certainly in a system of change right now. There's a lot going on, and as we work closer with the provider network that we're bringing in and gain input and feedback from them, and continue our efforts gaining input and feedback from persons served, and grab that opportunities for closer bond, we'll be adjusting to a degree, and I'm sure that may impact some of the things we're doing here. Also, new we mentioned the NCQA, and then any other activities identified as priorities with the strategic plan or plan initiatives or any performance improvement activities that we're involved in, which are always ever-changing as well. We do have upcoming BBA changes. Some of that will reflect the the QAPIP. As Marquita started with, this is just kind of a review. We're going to have a more in-depth review of the QAPIP for FY19 coming up in November. So that will get into any changes that may be impacting the QAPIP as a result of the BBA. But for now, that's our review, and we're happy to entertain any questions you may have or comments.
Are there questions? Ms. Schulman?
On the telemedicine, are there any barriers at the state or federal level legislation that's going to affect our work with that here?
As far as I've seen, they've just been opening up opportunities more. We did have early on barriers, and other teammates may have thoughts on what some of the barriers that are out there still could be. But they have been opening up barriers. They've been opening up codes that have allowed more telemedicine use, taking away some of the restrictions that were limiting it. The barriers in county that we have seen, some of our providers are and have actively been using it. And we're using it effectively. We're trying to promote it to some of the providers who have not broached into that arena yet as much. I'd say the most challenging part, at least from my perspective, that we've seen is, as I'd shared, Common Ground, partnering with some of the hospitals and emergency departments to be able to use telemed for some of the folks that end up at the EDs and potentially staying there for longer periods of time. And that has related to a number of different things, related to the credentialing process with the hospitals, some liability concerns that they have, and so forth. But we have made ongoing efforts. And as I'd shared, probably more news coming down the pike here, but we're putting together a comprehensive plan and going to review it internally to see if this is something we can make work. And we have some hospital partners that are joining us in creating that plan.
We're in the leadership positions in this area, because it's all very new going forward.
For public mental health to connect
Yes.
with them, it is,
That's
to
great.
my awareness, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, okay, first Mr. Landsman, then Ms. Respecki.
Akita, I have to tell you, it's pretty amazing when you can take something as dry as QPIC and make it sound interesting with the changes for NCQA and HEDIS. So thank you. Or at least maybe it's interesting to me, I don't know. So I had a couple of questions. One had to do, and you answered them already for me, but I'll ask them for the whole group. You know, the report is on what we're going to be, the plan is on what we're going to measure for the year. So when do we actually report out to the state and to us on the numbers as we're, because I know it's a continuous process.
So that type of data is included in the year-end report. When the external quality review reviews us, they would assess how we are doing on that. So that's the feedback mechanism to the state. Yeah, that's in the summary report, year-end summary.
And the other is, one of the questions I asked was on health needs screenings. So I was trying to make sure I understood the difference between, because I always hear about us doing locus and CIS and things like that, and you had said that these were a different kind of screenings.
Those are assessments. The CIS is an assessment, the locus is an assessment. The screenings that we speak of and the QUAPIP are, for the most part, I think we spoke about the hemoglobin A1C being a screening and some other preventative type measures that are screenings to give us indicators as to whether or not we need to do additional follow-up.
The last question I have is sort of a structural one for both of you guys. So with this more robust QPIC, if you will, and with us doing the NCQA, which I'm assuming we're going to get next summer, got my fingers crossed, and the additional HEDIS measures, do you think that's putting us in a better situation to go head-to-head with some of the plans, the payers? I'm sorry, the healthcare plans in terms of managed care, expanding what we can do and things like that?
Would give us, will be measured on the same performance type elements. I think Matt and I had a conversation about where the PIHPs, we're not so much in a race with the health plans because we do a very good job in many areas where the health plans have weaknesses that they're not doing so well at. So I'm not so sure if we want to compare ourselves to them, but the HEDIS measures will give us, at least we'll have some of the same measures that we both are being compared against. Matt, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to clarify, some of the development to make it more robust, it wasn't so much an adding to or building to around, multiple more staff or anything like that. It was taking what we had and revamping it and creating those pathways to ensure the communication with the quality steps are going to the committees and so forth. Relative to the health plans, I guess the thing I'd say, in line with what Marquita said, we talked a little bit earlier, When we went to take on the NCQA, and I was previously in Macomb as well, and we were doing the same thing, some of the thoughts that were kind of shared around that was that we were moving in a direction to try to align with the health plans or be like the health plans. And I think what I would like to echo here at least is that I think we're trying to improve quality, and we are improving quality, and not trying to be the health plan. We do a lot of great things as a system of care here, and not trying to pretend we're the health plan. Health plans do good things too, in some ways, some things that we are working towards, in data and things like that. But there's a lot of things that we do that the health plans are aching to try to learn too. We went to the Medicaid Health Plan Conference in July, for example, and they talked a lot about the things that they're struggling with. They're struggling with consumer engagement and said things that they're terrible at, consumer engagement. They talked about, do they really do outcome performance-based contracting? And a lot of them talked about how they don't and how they're working on fee for service, and they want to move in that area. So a lot of areas that they're trying to look and gain out of the things that we're doing. So I just would say, we're not trying to so much compete. We're not trying to be them. We're doing a lot of good things already. And in fact, they're trying to learn some things from us.
My question is kind of in line with Jonathan's. It has to do with the NCQA and if managed care entities are utilizing the NCQA for their standards. I guess in my mind, as you were going through your report, I was wondering, how do we take our good points that that aren't happening in managed care and utilize them in however we prepare our defense for our system? And I just didn't know whether NCQA gives them any more advantage than what we have with the QAHIP and the NCQA. Are we in a stronger position?
I'd say we're in a stronger position as an organization as a result of the NCQA changes we made. I wouldn't say we're lining us up, or are we stronger than the health plans or anything like that. I'm not speaking in comparative terms, but if I just speak for OCHN, I think we're in a stronger position as a result of NCQA changes we've made. Does that answer your question?
I think so, because I think there's so much material to go over and kind of really digest, and you're trying to look at, the fight ahead, so to speak, and where do we go as far as a direction. It has to be affected by some of what you've been describing, and I just hope we have the opportunity to use our advantages, what we see, our strong points. And I'm guessing there are dollar signs that attach to that, so that when managed care is presenting its advantages, we have a whole lot more, and perhaps we can put dollar signs as it relates to that too. I don't think I've heard any discussion, but you're implying that, there have been annual conferences where you're hearing the data, where their weak points are, and I think it'd be helpful to know how much stronger we are.
And perhaps that's something we could gain from as we move into NCQA and looking at the areas that we are improving. Certainly there's going to be better outcomes and quality and service through some of the changes. Measuring that, quantifying it, and it would be helpful. Obviously something we'll be looking to do.
Just related to your question, I do know, for example, that my brother is medical director at one of the Medicaid health plans, and they did pass NCQA. So I don't know if all of them do it, but I do know that some of them do. So, are there any other? Oh, yes, Kathleen.
I'd like to make a comment on that. Yes, indeed, the Medicaid health plans generally are accredited through NCQA. One of the great things about us aligning with that is the approaches to healthcare can be consistent. So ultimately, we are speaking more of the same language, and the outcomes for people are all moving in the same direction. So that's really the great piece about this. It does take us into a whole new arena where we are learning a new language, and again, we do have to go there. It is all about integrated healthcare, and this can truly align us, but it also does position us for the future, and we can't deny that we have our eye on that.
Additional questions or comments? Well, thank you very much, as usual, Marquita.
This is an item for approval.
Oh, that's right. May I have a motion to approve? This is the QuaPIP.
Yes.
FY
18.
18.
I'd like to make that motion to approve the QuaPIP.
Is there a second?
Support.
Been moved by Mr. Landsman, seconded by Dr. Klotz. Is there any further discussion or questions? Then may we have a roll call vote?
Dr. Hans, Mrs. Raspecki, Dr. Arrington.
Yes.
Ms. Newman.
Yes.
Dr. Taub.
Yes.
Dr. Klotz.
Yes.
Ms. Schulman.
Yes.
Ms. Kucharek. Yes. Mr. Landsman. Yes. Mr. Furman.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes, and I hope you're happy with it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, board members.
Next, we have Jillian and Annette. Good evening. Very good.
Okay, hi everyone, and good evening. So we have put this item on the agenda. As you know, Jillian usually does a report on the service network teams and how we're doing with contracting and such. In our study session last month or the month before, we talked about, we have had a lot of presentations on healthcare outcomes, on process steps, on contracting, and the board expressed wanting to hear more of a strategic position and the impact on people served. So the intent of this presentation is to focus on employment, where we are currently with our employment models and outcomes for people, where we hope to see ourselves in the future, and then a future presentation will be more focused on residential and housing, and we'll continue to focus on what's often called those social determinants of health, those things day to day that are important to people. So we'll start with the employment one. I do want to let you know when this was added to the agenda, I had no idea that Community Living Services was presenting on the same day, and I also had no idea that people were coming for public comment, but I think the stars just lined up right, because I can't think of a more persuasive way to convince everybody why employment is so important other than to hear from people who are actually employed, and you could just see all the benefits from them telling their own stories. So I know it touched me, including one of the people giving public comments I helped welcome into our system as an intake worker about a dozen years ago, and I am thrilled to hear he's employed in landscaping and irrigation now. So it was wonderful for me to see him after all this time. So I'm going to give you a philosophical, strategic approach and where we're aiming. Jillian is going to give you some details. She's done a lot more deep diving into the data that we're seeing. And I don't want this presentation to discount at all from the work of Francisco Gamboa, who is here. And we have drawn a lot of our information from the work that Francisco has been doing for many years. So certainly we want to give him kudos for all his hard work as well. So if we take a look at employment, I first wanted to share with you nationally what the data looks like with regard to employment outcomes for people with disabilities in comparing the different states. And you'll see the red line right in the middle is Michigan. Our Michigan success rate for employment of people who are engaged in our service system via our waiver programs tends to be around 19 or 20% here in Michigan. You'll see we're pretty much right in the middle of the pack when it comes to how we compare nationally. You'll see there are states such as Washington that have very high success levels of employment for people they serve. And a lot of that, when you explore the Washington models, they have just put a lot of focus and emphasis on the importance of employment. And as was discussed, a lot of times it's the expectation of employment that does push for wonderful employment outcomes. This idea of instead of asking people, do you want to work, the question changes to, it's expected that all working age adults work, what kind of work do you want to do and how can we help you? So different approaches can lead to different outcomes, and these are some of the things that we hope to infuse into our service models as we have continued emphasis on employment and income generation for all here in this county. So in the past, service models used to go along a continuum of care is what it used to be called, or a level of care. where when people would come to us for services or exiting out of school, it was almost always assumed that people were waiting or hoping to get on the waiting list to get into the sheltered workshop, to get into the day program. The building-based programs were seen as that stepping stone to achieve other outcomes. And then they would transition into maybe a mobile crew or an enclave where it was groups doing employment and being employed at deviated wages. And then after they succeeded in that, then we would hope that people would get to integrated competitive employment in the community. Unfortunately, what the data has shown is for a person with an intellectual or a developmental disability, and this is national data, if they step foot into a disability-specific building program, like a day program or a sheltered workshop, the percentage of people who actually exit and get employment in the community where they're elbow to elbow with the rest of community members falls right around 5 or 6%. So the success rate for using those models isn't very high. And what we've seen so often is once people get into a building-based program, they tend to stay there. And some people stay there for 20, 30, 40 years until they're at retirement age. So we're trying to look at systems different, and we're trying to say wherever people are, wherever they're coming from, we want the approach to be community-based. The other reason, aside from the success rate and aside from, or maybe I should say the lack of a success rate when using building-based programs, we have to look at what advocates are saying. And this comes from The Riot, which is a publication by self-advocates, people who are with lived experiences and receiving services. Their view on sheltered work. So it says the sheltered workosaurus. I don't know if you see the conveyor belt. Why do we keep putting people with disabilities in these programs? And you know, the tagline, of course, is stop feeding the dinosaur. We want real jobs. And often it's tagged on, we want real jobs for real pay. It gets added questions. We have to question ourselves even more with the new federal regulations. So the federal regulations are saying that people need to be elbow to elbow with everyone else in society, and that our services, the Medicaid-funded services at the federal level, should not be provided in disability-specific buildings. So why do we keep the front door open? Why do we keep putting more students coming out of special education into the very buildings that we know we're going to have to transition away from? So this is the federal advocacy movement, and we certainly want to listen to what is innovative in the service field of folks with people with disabilities receiving vocational services. Words of wisdom from one of my favorite people, Maya Angelou, and I know others on the board are fans as well. You do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, you do better. So this is not to say that any of these programs are ill-intended. As a matter of fact, many are highly, highly valued by the families we serve. We have certainly seen that through the years. And the people, because it offers them opportunities to be with people, somewhere to go. If we want to be really honest, it offers respite for families who are providing caregiving. So as we talk about this shift from building-based programs to community, we have to pay very close attention to what needs these building-based programs are meeting for families and people, and find other ways to make sure that we are not ending something that's of high importance to people and not replacing it with other models of support that are valuable to them. The reality of the situation, though, is that separation is what's occurring, whether you call it specialized, whether you call it adaptive, whether you call it segregation, separate housing, separate employment, separate activity programs, separate transportation. All these things eliminate the possibilities of people having natural supports and opportunities to connect with people of the general community and the true inclusion and belonging that we're trying to help people see. So what happens is that the people that enter the people's lives then are other recipients of separate supports and separate services and paid staff of these separate services. So it's a profound reality that cannot be ignored. And what we've been doing as a service system on a whole is substituting for community. So we provide somewhere for people to go during the day, and we provide housing that's very disability specific labeled, and we provide recreation that involves dances that are only people with disabilities, and we provide Weight Watchers groups only for people with disabilities. But what we're doing is creating separate communities for people, substitute communities for people. So the strong push we're going to want to be doing philosophically is to say we don't want to substitute for community. We want to support people to engage in the community like everybody else. And the reason we want to do this is we've got to be really careful because a lot of times, especially with these new federal regulations, people say, well, we have to be compliant with the home and community-based settings rules. And yes, we do have to be compliant with the home and community setting rules. We won't be able to use Medicaid if we don't achieve compliance. But compliance is not our goal. Compliance is not what we're aiming for. It would be like saying if you went to a restaurant and compliance was all you cared about, and they would say, well, what would you like to order? And you would say, I don't care as long as it doesn't have bugs in it, right? Compliance is the minimum expectation of what we should be achieving. So we want to achieve something greater, and we want to make sure that the vision we're sharing for people is of something greater. And that is 100% inclusion of the folks that we serve in our everyday communities. So our annual plan outlines several methods and strategies that we are hoping to implement over the next year with a high focus on employment and improving our outcomes. As you know, we've been developing values-based contracts and values-based service models and pay structures for quite some time. I have to say what we have done with employment is seen not only in Michigan, but nationally as hugely, hugely innovative. And just as a reminder, what it looks like here in Oakland County, which is separate from anywhere else in the state and most places in the nation. There's only 2 other states, Oklahoma and Wisconsin, who are doing what we are. Instead of paying for face-to-face job coaching, when people would get a job, we used to pay just for face-to-face. As long as I'm your job coach, I get paid as the provider. We shifted in January to say the provider gets paid when the person is working, and the provider then is naturally incentivized to provide job coaching when needed, fade it back when needing. So what it is respecting the provider's judgment to say, I want to teach Victoria to be as independent on the job as possible. I will provide coaching, whatever I need to help her be successful, but then I will fade it back because I want to teach her that skills and how to count on coworkers and interact with her manager. And the difference in this is, in the past, providers only got paid when they were with people. Now providers are getting paid to use their judgment to say, we're going to fade back, we're still going to be here, we want to keep you employed. That's going to help also with our shortage of direct support workers. There's no doubt we don't have enough good qualified job coaches, but this allows them to serve more people, spread out their resources, because we are not financially incentivizing them to say, I have to be glued to the hip to you at all times or I don't get paid. Really innovative in our field. The other thing we're doing is with our use of technology and our dashboards. So we have developed new dashboards specifically to these new service models, and we are rolling out some new ones currently because, yes, employment is in our plan. We have an annual plan objective to say we're going to increase the number of people in competitive integrated employment, so we're tracking that very closely. The other thing we're tracking, though, is we don't want to not acknowledge the fact that we have people who have spent 20, 30 years of their lives in facilities, Monday through Friday, 9 to 3, in the building-based programs. And it's of value to them. They value it. We don't want to disrupt their lives suddenly and close anything. That's not our plan. But what we do want to do is incentivize those providers to say, we all know we need to move to community. So if you've been running a 100% building-based, facility-based program, you've got to start moving towards community. We have to see that direction. So the dashboards we're developing now is where the providers can log in and they can say, okay, month by month, are you increasing the amount of time people are spending in the community? We see that as a success. I mean, we need to see the direction going that way. So the providers will have the ability to track how they are doing and to compare themselves based on others. How are others doing? In addition, our strategic plan this year added new criteria to emphasize service provision that advances community participation and belonging is a priority to us. So we always talked about connecting with community and things like that, but we did want to be really clear in line with the federal mandates that we do believe that having people out of the segregated buildings and into the community has very much benefit, and this belonging and purpose should be part of the person-centered planning process. So that's new in our annual plan this year. So individual served, just to tie some numbers to the data we're going to be talking about. We're only going to be talking about individuals 18 years and older, and we are only going to be talking about individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and/or mental health and mental illness diagnosis. So that'll be the group. When we looked at the numbers for fiscal year 18, now this is snapshot numbers, so this is not meaning people who have come and gone. At moment in time, 11,525 people would generally be who we're talking about. Again, that number does not include children, does not include the folks we serve with in substance use recovery efforts. So skill building. Skill building is one of the services we're going to talk about, and that is when I talk about the facility versus the community. Skill building is the service that's typically provided in the building or can be provided in the facility. So if we look at the number of people in skill building services, you see we just broke it down by year based on the number of people who receive that service. Again, just informational numbers so you know how many people we're talking about. And this transition to community in fiscal year 18 in January is when we implemented these new service models. You surely probably remember that the service models also incentivize a movement from facility to community. The rates are higher for community versus facility, and the rates are adjusted based on group size. We did not want to see van loads of 10 people going out in the community in huge groups. So we do pay higher rates for lower group sizes because it's easier to integrate, meet people, and be connected when you're going out in smaller groups or individually. So this is consistent with our philosophy, and of course it is also consistent with the home and community-based service regulations that are coming our way. So our service models establish higher rates for community-based services. Encounter data allows us to monitor when they submit the encounters. The providers have to put a code on the end of it to say facility-based code or community-based code. So they are reporting to us which it's provided. That allows us to know which way to pay them. Also allows us to do those dashboards so that we can all see what direction our data is going into, and the providers can track for themselves. And right now, I do want to tell you, we are strictly seeing getting in the community as a success. Is that short of what our ultimate goal is? Yes. I mean, ultimately, we want to start talking about what people are doing in the community, and does that offer opportunities to increase social capita, build skills? Right now, the measurement is anything that's provided outside the facility, we're seeing as a success. We've got to start somewhere. What do they say? The journey, or any journey, begins with the first step. We see the first step as let's work on figuring out how to get people out, and then we'll start to have more conversation about are we doing the everything we can to make sure we're doing connectedness and not just community exposure. But we're going to start here with community exposure and getting people out. So during our transition, we started these new pay structures in January. That's when they rolled out, and you'll see our numbers and the percentage of people and their time spent for January. So when we kicked this off, the facility-based 65% of the people were spending their time in the facility, and 35% were spending their time in the community. We use May as a comparison month because providers are still rolling in their data at different intervals. It's a new rollout, so we're giving some extra time for data processing. But if you look 5 months into the new payment structure, you will see that facility went down by 5% to 60% time, community went up by 5%, 40%. Now, I wish I could say that meant all providers across, our entire network are improving, but that's why I had Jillian do a deeper dig, and she's going to kind of share the variance we've seen when we look at providers on this data.
Sure. So some of what I want to talk about is the first year of the model, starting in January. So while we certainly hoped to see more community-based supports looking 5 months out, I'm not entirely surprised. And that this first year has been a growth year for us as an organization and for the provider network. For these providers, it was a shift from fee-for-service arrangements to a case rate payment. It was a shift to understanding our models, and a shift for some of them to really start looking at exactly what Annette's been talking about, that shift to community and how do we provide services to people integrated in their community, doing the kinds of things that are meaningful to them with the ultimate goal moving towards employment. So now we're going into the second year, and I'm optimistic and confident that we're really going to start to see more and more of a shift to community-based services now that we have providers who really understand the model and really start to be moving toward and embracing some of those changes. So what I did want to talk about a little bit was what the dashboard information shows. So we do have 5 providers, and they're relatively small providers, so that impacts our overall percentages and numbers, who have always been 100% community-based. So those providers started January 1st being community-based service providers and are today still community-based service providers. So that leaves about 9 additional providers that are some combination of facility and community-based services. We have 3 that I would say have really embraced the model with increases of 13%, 15%, and 24% respectively, looking at the time between January and now. We have 3 providers that have embraced the model. We just talked about those. And we have 5 providers who've not really made any significant movement one way or the other. Their percentage is, maybe 1 or 2% different than what we saw in January. One of those providers who only serves 1 person actually has chosen not to work toward compliance with HCBS rules, so that individual will transition to different types of services with different providers. So we're really looking at 4 that haven't made any significant movement one way or the other. And then we have 1 provider who's actually increased their facility base. So we're looking into that right now to see what's happened. Certainly, the model itself incentivizes community-based services, so without having more of an in-depth look at what might be going on there, I'm not confident to say. But we are starting to see some of that movement. I'm really happy with the 3 that we have seen really embrace the model and continue to have Francisco do all of his hard work to work with the provider network and keep moving forward.
We're hoping to celebrate those ones that are making transition and hoping they can learn from each other too. So now that we hold these contracts for these provider organizations, which we did not in the past, we will be hosting quarterly meetings where we're bringing all of the vocational and employment providers together, and we're going to have these very conversations. So I do want you to know that you guys are getting like a preview on the philosophical approach, the values, and obviously these providers have worked in this field for a long time, so none of it is surprising, but we want to make sure that we're using a peer-to-peer model where those who have made the shifts can brainstorm and ask questions, and they can learn from each other, because we do definitely have some providers who are making some wonderful shifts, and it's been wonderful to see. And as a matter of fact, even as a side note, Dutton Farms, the one that came up and spoke in the public comment, used to provide 100% building-based services. So the fact that they're having great successes in employment has been really wonderful to see, right? So providers are working towards that, so we're happy about that. Now, if we talk about supportive employment, again, these are just the numbers. So these are people who have supportive employment services in their plans as far as volume and service utilization. I will say that this numbers, there may have been a bigger shift in the utilization of supportive employment than is dictated by the numbers here. And the reason would be when we started defining how the codes would be used and how the codes would be paid, we made some decisions on things like supportive employment can only be utilized when people are making minimum wage or more. So we define the code differently to say we're holding the standard high, the expectation high, where in the past some providers may have used supportive employment code for deviated wage, mobile crews, enclaves, where people got less than minimum wage. So the numbers and the shift towards supportive employment might be more drastic than what this happens, because in 18 is when we changed the definition of how it could be used to hold to a higher standard. The employment first goal, I don't have to repeat it. Lisa defined this for you: integrated, competitive employment at minimum wage or more. These definitions are dictated by the federal government, and the majority of the states in the nation now have adopted what's called the Employment First Initiative. Michigan was one of the starter states, but the rest of the states have come along. And the idea is that we all are defining it the same way. Individuals working, being paid directly by employers, so no middleman on the employment model, occurring in typical community work environments that elbow to elbow, at least minimum wage. So those are the criteria of how we're defining it as success. Our approach that we have taken, and these approaches have evolved over time, is that we're tracking income generation goals. So this has been in the provider contracts for quite some time. If the assessment that is done says the person wants to work, there's been tracking of does a goal get in their plan saying, that employment is an outcome. And we have offered incentives on that. It didn't just start this year. So we're trying to roll this out in phases. Long before I was in this role, I want to give credit that this is something that has happened a long time and it's not new to people. We're establishing a transparent rate structure. In the past, the different providers were all paid at different rates. It was just based on how they negotiated with whatever core provider agency held their contracts. I don't want to discount the process that if anyone's been involved in bringing rate consistency across an entire network, it's not easy, but that was achieved, and now everybody is on consistent rate schedules, which is a huge success and is necessary to be competitive in managed care environments. So that's been a lot of work on behalf of the staff, and it's worked out well. And we are addressing the staff to person served ratio. We don't want providers to be incentivized to take people out in huge groups. We worked with a consultant, Lisa Mills. Now, she was a part of the Wisconsin development of these payment-based outcome models. Oklahoma has also. Michigan is the third state to do so. I was just at a national conference yesterday when Wisconsin, Oklahoma, and Oakland County in Michigan were specifically referenced, because I don't know if we've told you this, the state of Michigan got a grant to implement this new model of paying for hours the person works, not face-to-face job coaching. And there were 4 grant sites throughout the state of Michigan. Oakland is the only one who made it through the whole process and implemented it. So we're leading the state, and people are trying to learn from us in this process. So the payment on the hours worked, we've already talked about, and then I did want to make sure you know the funding matrix does pay higher rates for people who have higher level of need. So there is an acuity factor based on an assessment such that we did not want anyone, what you might call creaming, saying we only want to work with the easy to employ people. So the rates are set up that way so that everybody is incentivized to seek employment, and the providers too are incentivized to welcome all people as a viable option for a job in the community. So the model is really exciting, and the idea is to maximum the hours that the person works. So sometimes when these models get rolled out, there's criticism in that, what if people only work 2 hours? What if people only work 4 hours? By saying that the model pays based on the number of hours the person works, I would be very incentivized if Lois was only working 2 hours to say, Lois, let's try to see if we can't get you some more shifts, and give her the encouragement she needs to want to work more hours. So it does that. It minimizes the face-to-face requirements. And again, that's meant to honor the professionalism of the job coaches and the people who go through training, and let them use their discretion about bringing supports in, fading it out according to what makes sense. And of course, the model incentivizes everybody wanting the person to keep their job. Because if the person loses their job, there goes the income for the provider. So everybody wants everybody to be successful, and that's putting all of our energy in the right place. So our employment data. Now we are, this is a snapshot in time again for fiscal year 18. And the people who served are employed. We're counting part-time and full-time the same. We're counting being employed as a huge success. And I'm hoping as time goes on and we do future presentations, you will see that number increase. It's not big enough. The number of people employed is not big enough. And when I say it's not big enough, it works out to be about 14%. So that is less than the state average, and it's less than the national average. And for everything we're doing, we just need to generate more conversations about employment, enthusiasm about employment, and that's what we aim to do. That's what we aim to do. So the quote of the day, you ask yourself, what you're doing today, is it getting you closer to where you want to be tomorrow? I sure hope so, because we are putting a lot of energy into this, and I know our provider network has, and all of our staff have, and I believe we are lining things up so that we can be where we want to be tomorrow. I think we need to work with the schools. So this is kind of a jab at the schools, and it's really just to poke fun about expectations or bring awareness about expectations. After graduation, you'll need to know how to fill out these government forms. This is not the message we want to send to young people who are exiting the school system. And I know Judy's not here, but she always talks about school transition. I'm happy to report, I told you in a prior meeting that we had submitted a concept paper in collaboration with Community Living Services through the DD Council. And the DD Council did give feedback that they would like us to submit. Community Living Services will be submitting a full grant proposal. So we're hoping we will get funding to do some more intensive school transition planning with the focus on employment and with the focus on people living in everyday residential apartments in the community, the whole self-determination model in the schools. We feel partnering with the schools is key to the success and a different vision. And what you count counts. So one of the things we have said is if we want to see more employment, we got to make sure we're also putting our money where our mouth is. So these are our fiscal year 19, it'll start October 1st, performance incentives in these vocational service provider contracts. And I think they are amazing. I wish I could take credit, but Francisco presented these to me. I'm not sure who else on the team helped develop them, but when I read them, I thought this is so good. What we're doing is tying dollar amounts to these incentives. Providers can choose to try and achieve them all, or they can pick a couple as their priorities. So if they increase the training for their staff on SSI, Social Security, work incentives, if 33% of their staff are trained in these areas, they will get a financial incentive at the end of the year. If they do not renew their 14C sub-minimum wage certificate, that's the certificate that they apply for saying that they can pay less than minimum wage. And the majority of the vocational providers in Michigan all have them. Some states are banning them altogether. I haven't heard Michigan talk about it, but I do know some of our vocational providers have already said that they are going to let their certificates expire. They will get a financial incentive from us for doing so. If they increase the community-based skill building services by at least 20%, or for those who have already been at 100%, we certainly want to reinforce that they are on the right track and doing great work. So we have 5 who have always been 100%. They will get a financial incentive, or those who increase. And again, we've got dashboards where they can track. We're all looking at the same thing. They will know quite easily whether they increased it between January and the end of the fiscal year, or I guess in this case, October and the September 30th. Facility-based referral cessation, so that's closing the front door. So they get new referrals from these individuals exiting out of school, different scenarios. If they say, our new model is we serve people in the community. So there's one thing about the existing people who are in the building, but there's how are you going to serve new people? So if they serve all new people in the community, they'll get a financial incentive. Facility-based closure announcement and plan. So some of these programs have multiple buildings. If they make a plan to close one of their buildings, 2 of their buildings, what we're asking for is a formal announcement, approval by their board, a plan, they'll get a financial incentive. What we're trying to do is incentivize them to work with their board and their leadership and their stakeholders to come up with a plan to move in this direction in whichever means makes sense for them. And then, of course, increasing the number of people who are served in competitive integrated employment. That is ultimately what we want to see. It is in our annual plan, so there will be financial incentives. That one about increasing the number of people in employment is the highest paid financial incentive, because that's kind of the direction we all want to see it going, and it is key to our annual plan. So our secret is to focus all of our energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. So that's what we're trying to do, is focus on success, celebrate those who are doing it, help those along who aren't, and hopefully see a whole lot more people in employment, or at least actively and embraced in their community. Because if not us, who? We are the leaders in the disability field. We're the leaders in the state. We need to be innovative. We need our providers to be innovative. And we need the people we serve to see the full benefit of community inclusion and employment, so they too can share success stories, just like the people who shared with us when we started off tonight's meeting. So that concludes our presentation.
Well, thank you very much, and let's start with Ms. Kuchari.
First of all, thank you for that energetic presentation. I don't know about everyone else at this time of night. I'm checking out, so thank you for perking me back up.
I'm glad I didn't lose you.
No, it was fantastic. Can you give us an example of some of the providers? I'm not familiar with the providers doing this. That's my first question. And the second, is there ever incentives for the employers?
So the first question, we chose at this meeting not to name the providers by name, and the reason is we haven't met with them to talk. I mean, they got the incentives via email, and we have the October meeting where we're going to dig deep into these. So we want to give all the providers opportunities to demonstrate some success so that we're celebrating successes of all of them. We would hate to mention any when they're all in a learning curve. I mean, it's just something we wanted to do out of respect for the provider network. But in future meetings, we certainly will be mentioning names and who's doing well and sharing more of the specific dashboard data with the specific providers. And with regard to the community, I'll tell you, it's a big debate on do you focus on employment from the person perspective or on the community perspective? So there are employment incentives for providers with regard to tax breaks and different things that they can apply for. I guess I don't know that our focus has been on the community. It's more been on person-centered planning, individual, and finding people's niche. Our current programs that we have running are on customized employment, and that is more about matching people's skills and interests with the right employer. And I guess I would say generally we've taken a one person at a time approach. Let me ask Jillian, are you aware of outreach to the community and employers that we're doing?
Where we're at pretty sufficiently.
We did just talk about it this morning, though. I will say Christine Burke raised that question with me. Should we be doing more to get employers wanting to hire people with disabilities? So I think it's probably going to be on our communication plan through potentially Christine Burke's department to do more outreach, because obviously if we get employers looking for diverse workforces, that only offers more opportunity for folks.
Actually, I want to follow up on that because I was thinking about the degree to which, for example, you've developed anti-stigma campaigns, I know, working with Malkaya, but do we need to educate the public to want to hire them? It can't, I realize the providers are the ones responsible because you're providing incentives for them, but I think in general, the public needs to be educated. You can't just, you can send somebody out into the community, and I think one of your slides said people might notice them, but they don't get to know them. Right. And that's where the educational part, I think, would come in. If we could do some videos or spots for television again, I say.
Also going to be getting face-to-face with some of the employers and really helping employers in the community to understand the value that having a diverse workforce, including people with disabilities, can bring to your specific business as well.
And I couldn't help but think when we were hearing the speakers, because I was sitting there thinking, we've got to get those PSA announcements that we've been talking about, and I thought, we need to get folks like this that talk with such passion about their job, right? When people see the passion people have about employment and how they feel, I think it could help with that whole stigma, and that we need dedicated employees, and some of the folks we serve are the most dedicated employees out there. So, yeah, I'm with you.
Bajaya.
Subject that I have deep interest in, as I will, based on what is the idea behind the transition to community services for new referrals as opposed to all comers based on their abilities?
When I mean new referrals, it's kind of that, what about the front door? So right now, as individuals are coming into our service system brand new, they are often being put right into the building-based programs that we know we're going to have to transition them out of later. So that causes a couple problems. One, our volume with coming into compliance with the federal guidelines gets bigger and bigger and bigger, particularly every school year when the students graduate, there comes a bigger population. But two, then you've got a whole group of people, you have to introduce them to something else. When people are new, and you know what, maybe this is easy for me to say because at Community Living Services, we never put anybody into any building-based program ever. So when people were new, we would automatically start with a blank piece of paper, start with your dreams, wishes, desires, interests, and then connect people with the community, and they would get picked up right at their house and go do things in the community, and it had nothing to do with the building. So I think what we're trying to focus on that as an incentive. We didn't say we're closing the front door to anything. We put it as an incentive for this year, hoping that providers will say, let's go ahead and get ahead of this because they have to start offering a different service model. It's a way for you to do it on a smaller scale while the numbers are smaller and show your staff and stakeholders that we can do it in the community without involving people coming to a building.
Question is about, so is there any plan for converting the facility-based to community-based? Is there an incentive for that?
Yes, so that is one of the incentives on the list, that if they, and we want them to do it on their own, you know, so what we're saying is if they announce a plan, it's not like they have to do it tomorrow. Part of the biggest impediments to systems change is making the decision that you're going to change. So what we're trying to do is incentivize people to say, decide that you're going to close. Tell us what your plan is to close your building. It's up to you to develop the timeline, make sense for your stakeholders, but submit to us what your plan is. So we do have an incentive specifically around that. We don't want to have to be the ones that close the day programs and shut the front door. The federal government may very well make us do that. But we have some time, you know, with regard to the guidelines right now. If people are showing the right movement and they're actively putting plans in place, that's being seen as moving in the right direction. So we're just trying to help add extra incentive to move people in the right direction.
Ms. Newman.
I have a couple of different questions. One is not a question, it's a statement. I know you're big on words.
Uh-oh, did I do something wrong?
No.
Okay.
Because this hasn't been included, but I have a problem with the word disability.
Okay.
Because it starts out negative. So when Bess was developing our surveys, I pushed for them to put abilities with a capital A, so that you always emphasize the ability and not the dis. I'm just putting that out there.
I know.
First thing.
Okay. I'll think on it. It's a hard one. I'll think on it, though, because I know what you're saying.
And I'm also, I have a hard time when I don't understand what a particular service involves. And I'm sure that it's been explained to us before, but when you just say skill building, I don't know what all that includes or involves. So when you're making presentations like this, it would be helpful for me. I don't know if anybody else feels this way, but when you talk about skill building, we're talking about doing A, B, C, and D. So I have a better idea of what it is you're talking about doing in the community.
No, Jillian do you know what slide number it is? She put the definition on there.
Slide number 12.
But it is the definition
it's
on
the
the
definition from the
Medicaid
Medicaid
manual.
provider manual.
So I don't know if that is exactly what you're looking like, but you are thinking, so right there in the middle, probably more examples might be helpful, but let's see, this says services to support economic self-sufficiency and or engage in meaningful activities such as volunteering or work. Services can include assistance with skill acquisition, retention, or improvement in self-help, socialization, and adaptive skills. So that comes right out of the Medicaid manual. It's the technical definition. Basically, it is the service that gets provided in the day programs, the sheltered workshops, or it can be people volunteering, taking classes, and doing things in the community. So that's the service that gets reported when those things happen.
I'm seeing a disconnect between what we're doing and the emphasis on work. When you're doing the presentation, I don't see anything in there about incentivizing people for volunteering. If that's included, we were congratulating the young man that started his own business. I never hear anything about entrepreneurship. You know, I guess I don't want to discourage, I'm not trying to discourage work, but I just would like to see a broader view, because not everybody is cut out to do a 9 to 5 or a job in a facility or whatever. Some people, just like the young man said, I wanted to have my own business. I don't hear us talking about that, you know. And we even have, what do we call them? When people that receive services bring their businesses in and offer their goods. You know, we do that, but when you're talking about the incentives and talking about what we want the core agencies to do, I don't see an incentive for that.
No, part of the problem is with microenterprise, and trust me, you're talking to
Microenterprise.
somebody who, I personally developed at least 40 microenterprises, you know, in the last 10 years, personally helped people develop them. The employment first, remember how I said nationally, most of the states are on this federal employment first focus, and the criteria comes from the federal government, Michigan adopted it. It doesn't tend to count microenterprise. And the reason is it's a minimum wage or more, and microenterprises often start smaller, very, very small. So it's not meeting that criteria such that we can count it as a success for our data with regard to competitive integrated employment. Does that mean it's not valuable? Absolutely not. It's hugely valuable. So often when I speak, I talk about income generation versus getting a job, because income generation can look a lot of different ways. Unfortunately, income generation isn't in line with what the federal government and the state measures us. When we report data to Michigan, all the people with microenterprise get labeled as the same as being basically unemployed. Now, so that's an advocacy thing we probably need to work on because there's value. Volunteering is something we certainly see as valuable, but that comes back to volunteering in the community. We want people to volunteer in the community. So remember when I said right now our push is to help get people out of the facility? And then we got to do a deeper dig about making people valued and belonging and having social roles and purpose, because taking classes and volunteering and joining social clubs, and if you like gardening, being at the garden club for the city so that you're part of your community is our deeper dig. We've got to get there. Right now, we're just trying to get people out of the facility, and then we're going to take a deeper dig as to what they're doing. So not that it's not a priority, it's just, trust me, I'm ready to push people harder, but I don't want to push people away in the process. So we're trying to accept any community as a benefit at this moment.
Again, it's not a question, it's a statement. That's another reason why I take issue with people developing rules, regulations without involving the people that they're geared towards. Because it's easy for somebody to say, well, everybody needs to work. But where in that statement are you weighing the abilities of the people? Because not everybody can do the same thing. What do you do with a person that's not mobile at all? What kind of work would they be able to do?
They can do all kinds of work, Melchiah.
I like to see it.
Oh,
I'm serious. I would like to see it, because I've sat here and listened to parents come in here railing about closing the programs and my child can't work, and I understand. But what is the answer? I haven't heard the answer or seen anything presented that shows me what the alternatives are for a person who is not mobile, or a person who can't speak, or a person who's deaf. I mean, I'm not seeing it. I'm a visual person, so I need to see things. Just to say to me, we're pushing work, and then not break it out so I can see the inclusion of it. Because right now, the way it's being presented to me, I don't see the inclusion, because that's just the way I am. I need to see certain things.
We can certainly get more examples in front of you, because
me.
I agree. And I think having the people come for public comment was helpful in a vision of some people, but yeah, we can have more representation of all the people. And I guess my statement is, in response to your statement or question, I don't think it's up to us to determine who is capable of work and not capable of work. We want to offer everybody the opportunity to succeed. And we want to have an expectation that we're here to support everybody to build skills, and those who work will be seen as a tremendous success. But I don't want to discount anybody based on mobility. So we got to keep that high expectation for all people.
And I agree.
Okay.
But also, while we're doing that, what do you do for the person that can't do what somebody else can do? How do you maintain, make them a success? What is their success? I just don't want to see people.
I'll bring you people. We'll get more successes in
Please
front of
do.
everybody. For
Please
sure,
do.
for sure.
Because it bothers me tremendously, and I just need
They're
to
out
see
there.
it.
We'll get them in front of you.
Thank you.
Ms. Schulman.
I wondered, how does any of this affect our clubhouses and drop-in centers? Does any of this?
You know, that is a very interesting question. So typically when we're talking about this, we are more talking about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And typically when you're talking about Clubhouse, you're talking about peer-run, peer-led, peer support, which is a different service model. I mean, the way they're set up and operated. That being said, I've been tremendously impressed with the shifts in clubhouses with more of an employment focus, right? So employment, or clubhouses that maybe in the past, and again, I may be overly generalizing, but may have been seen more as socialization and recreation, they have made tremendous shifts towards employment-focused models and seeking employment skills that are transferable to community. So this same concept of income generation as a priority applies to all people. I think it gets unfolded differently in different environments. And our clubhouses, I've just watched the presentations here to the board through the years, has shifted in their focus so that they're doing more than they ever have in the past with a focus on employment.
Now, when we're talking about this, it's not focused on clubhouse or drop-in centers at this point.
No, because they're not
okay.
building skill building. That's billed under a whole different service code, so they're not reporting it as these codes that we're drawing from right now.
Then there was a mention of rate setting, and is that what Anya's been part of the state group, is all part of that? Okay.
Yeah. I was going to say, there's all kinds of rate setting going on, and the rate setting Anya may be talking about is our funding that comes to us as a PIHP, but the service models and how we set the rate to pay our network is, that's where our innovation is in this county. There's not many, I don't know that there's any other place in Michigan that's doing what we're doing with models.
To my knowledge, there's not. We've been asked to talk to other regions about what we're doing, and we've also presented at some conferences related to the implementation of the service model. So that's really been cross-functional. Certainly, Anya's been guiding and leading much of that work. Also, the clinical team, service network team, and others within the organization have really kind of cross-functionally been supporting those efforts.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to bring this to a close,
Yeah,
but
okay.
go ahead, Dr. Klotz.
I was just thinking, money is not the only report card of life, and I've seen companies, say like Consumers Power, AT&T, and others who provide creative incentives for their employees to go out and do volunteer work like Habitat for Humanity or whatever. And when my kids were little and they were in Cub Scouts, we actually had people from Consumers Power and AT&T knocking on our door of the Cub Scouts wanting to volunteer with us because they had incentives back at work. They would get time off, they would get awards, put them in line for promotions, all kinds of neat things. So I just want to remind us, that not everybody is money driven, and some will gravitate towards other, accolades and, stuff like that. I guess I'll just leave it at that. It scared me.
See, now my mic has been cut off. Did you want to say more?
No, I'll just let it go.
Any other comments? Oh, now it came back. You're sure?
3 times you're out. No, I'm fine.
Okay. Thank you very much for an excellent presentation.
Yeah.
Our next topic has been around for almost a year. Last November, I asked Victoria to send out the bylaws and policies to the board, and I asked for your comments on recommended changes. We got delayed a little bit selecting our new CEO, but in the last 2 study sessions, we went over them in depth. I did ask each of you to respond to me about a week ago when they were sent out again. They were sent out 2 weeks ago. I did not hear from some of you, but I did a quick survey before the meeting, and everybody seems to be in line with the bylaws. I do know that Eleanor called me and had one issue she wanted to raise, and I did talk to Kathleen about it, but I'll let you present your concern.
This comes purely because I was not at the study session, but in reviewing it, on page 15, the board rule regarding strategic analysis of future direction, and that's page 15. If that is what we are doing or to do, I wondered, is that opportunity for the board to participate as a group, to look at that versus being presented materials like the strategic plan and the annual plan where someone else has done the homework and looked at the material and where the trends are versus the board actually participating in trying to look at where we're going.
I think as you and I discussed, there's certainly plenty of opportunity for us through study sessions, et cetera, to sit down and discuss what we might envision as the future. I guess my concern is, does that affect the bylaws? Because that's a separate discussion. You're saying basically, are we doing what we have in our bylaws? And I agree with you, we should be. But do you have any objection to what's stated there?
I don't have any objections, but I have my questions which say somewhere along the line, let's take a look at it. And the other point I had related to the board doing setting some annual expectations for itself as a board. I know I've heard this over the many years we've had so many different people that have been involved working with us, but I don't think we've ever taken the time to look at ourselves and figure out what are we expected to do and then evaluate ourselves. And again, it's an item that probably goes on a future agenda for review.
I agree with you. We haven't done a self-evaluation in a long time. But you have no objection to the language in the bylaws?
Oh, the language.
I think you bring up good points, but
I think I said it's because I wasn't available that evening to hear all the discussion because I would have probably raised my questions then and heard many of the answers that you may have provided, so.
are there any other questions or comments on the bylaws before I seek a motion?
I'll make that motion. I think that's what those set of eyes just meant, right?
Well, yes, may I have a motion?
Yes, I will move, are we going to do the bylaws and the, the bylaws? I think we should do them separately. So first, I'll make a motion that we accept the changes to the bylaws as reviewed and in its present form tonight as of this date.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Ms. Kucharik, seconded by Ms. Respecki to approve the draft bylaws as presented this evening. May I have a roll call vote?
Dr. Hans? Yes. Mrs. Raspecki? Yes. Dr. Arrington?
Yes.
Ms. Newman?
Yes.
Dr. Taub?
Yes.
Dr. Klotz?
Yes.
Ms. Schulman?
Yes.
Ms. Kucharik?
Yes.
Mr. Landsman?
Yes.
Mr. Furman?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
I'd like to make another motion that we accept the changes to the Board Executive Director mandate as presented as of today's date.
Is there a second?
Board policies?
Yeah, isn't that part of the board policies?
Is the
I was
board
just being
policies?
thorough that we had it all, because they're separated by different names.
Right.
They're all part of the board policy.
So then, so it's my motion, I know I said it like this, right? That I said board policies and director mandate. So the changes as presented tonight.
Okay. Is there a second? It's been moved by Ms. Kucharik, seconded by Ms. Schulman to approve our board policies and executive mandate. May I have a roll call vote?
Dr. Hans? Yes. Mrs. Raspecki?
Yes.
Dr. Arrington?
Yes.
Ms. Newman? Yes. Dr. Taub?
Yes.
Dr. Klotz?
Yes.
Ms. Schulman?
Yes.
Ms. Kucharik? Yes. Mr. Landsman?
Yes.
Mr. Furman?
Yes.
And the motion carries. So thank you very much to all of you who contributed to the revisions. It's been a long process, but it's done.
We did a bang-up job.
And now we are going to have a series of reports, starting with Mr. Landsman, Recipient Rights Advisory Committee.
All right. The Recipient Rights Advisory Committee met on September 6th at 5:30. The facilitator was Nicole Gittleman. Our new OCHN Executive Director, Annette Downey, introduced herself, her approach, and her vision. There were a number of questions asked and answered. In all, a very nice and warm welcome to Annette by the RRAC. Vicki Suter, Director of Rights and Advocacy, provided a brief update. The organization is ready for the upcoming on-site visit by the state. This is an every 3-year on-site review. There will be an update and perspective at the next meeting on how the state's visit went. There was also a statewide recipient rights conference held September 11th through the 14th at Shanty Creek. OCHN's RRAC had attendees that attended. At our next RRAC meeting, they'll provide some insights, some takeaways, and some knowledge transfer of the conference. Jean Fender, boy, I butcher her name every time. I'm going to need a lesson in how to say her last name. Jean, who's our manager of the ORR, concurred with Vicki Suter that the team is ready for the state's visit. She also presented a high-level training on locusts. That's one of the assessments. We talked about that earlier tonight. It's related to CUPIC. That is the state's now mandatory diagnostic tool used for persons who are being served that have mental illness. The assessment assesses their types and levels of need. And while it's now mandatory and somewhat new to many other CMHs across the state, Oakland's been doing this for many, many years and has been called upon to provide expertise to help others implement it. Vicki Suter, the Director of Rights and Advocacy, identified that we now have 2 vacancies on the RRAC. So we had 1 last month, now we have 2. It's because one of our members that's been on this committee has had to resign because they no longer work nor do they live in Oakland County. So these are for 2 member-at-large positions. If you know of anyone who's interested in serving, please let Vicki know. In terms of site review data, we are at 90% complete. We will be completed by the end of the fiscal year. It's my understanding there's maybe 2 or 3 left, and we've got to get them done this week. So all sites will be done by the end of September. There was no Appeals Committee Chair update. Paulette Howell was not in attendance. So our next Recipient Rights Advisory Committee meeting will be held next week, Thursday, October 4th at 5:30.
Thank you, Mr. Landsman. Are there any questions? Okay, we'll move on to Ms. Schulman and the Consumer Advisory Committee.
I was not able to attend the meeting on September 13th. Mike Daly at that meeting did use the time to update members on the changes that are occurring within Oakland Community Health Network, and they discussed recent press releases that our CEO, Annette Downey, had made into the community. Our next meeting is on October 27th.
Thank you, Ms. Schulman. Dr. Klotz, Oversight Policy Board.
Thank you. Our last meeting was Wednesday, July 25th, and our next meeting is going to be October 24th, Wednesday at 1 p.m. There was a new bulletin that came out today from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, also known as SAMHSA, And they put out 3 new publications implementing tobacco cessation programs in substance use disorder settings. Historically, it's been interesting. People have attended AA, NA, and various other programs that address substance use. And historically, people have smoked, for example, like freight trains outside of, the meetings and stuff like that. And in the years gone by, even in the meetings, I don't think that's allowed anymore. What they have done, what SAMHSA has recommended, are these 3 publications, which on the surface, I haven't seen the publications yet, sound pretty good. One of which is implementing tobacco cessation programs in substance use disorder treatment settings. It's a quick guide for program directors and clinicians. The second one is quitting tobacco, helping your clients to a healthier life. And thirdly, you can quit tobacco, benefits and tips to quit for good. These publications are resources for substance use treatment providers, program directors, and clients. Usually brochures are geared towards one group or another, but they seem to have done a good job of incorporating them all together. And again, it's meant to implement tobacco cessation programs within the organization, outline the benefits of such programs, and reduce the use of tobacco products among clients with SUD. So, and also finally, again, I'll mention it, our next meeting is October 24th, Wednesday at 1 p.m., and we welcome lots of people to come and visit us.
Thank you, Dr. Glatz. You don't want to add anything, do you? We'll now have our director's report.
Okay, I feel like I've been talking a lot this meeting, so I'll try not to be too repetitive. But the secret of change is to focus your energy, as we discussed earlier, not on fighting the old, but on building the new. And changes can be uncomfortable and a challenge to navigate. Of course, our public mental health system has been through many, many changes. I would suspect it's fair to say we probably got more coming in the future. Fortunately, regardless of what comes our way, we have a strong mission and our strongly values-focused team and staff and provider network, and we will remain focused on inspiring hope, empowering people, and strengthening our communities. So we have already began hosting our listening sessions here at OCHN. I will say I received feedback, and I think it was from the Citizens Advisory Committee when I met with them. The first 4 listening sessions I'm hosting, we did schedule them here at our building. The next 4, I am making a promise to the CAC that they will be out in the community, scattered throughout the county. It was a wonderful suggestion, and I can't believe we didn't plan it that way from the beginning, but we listen and we learn, and that's why we're having these sessions. So in addition to hosting these listening sessions, I've also been attending meetings of the Citizens Advisory Council, Recipient Rights Advisory Council, the Begin Ending Stigma Today work group, and any other groups that invite me. So most of these groups are people with lived experience, not exclusively, but the majority. I've also attended advocacy group meetings and various parents group meetings, both hosted throughout the provider network and at the school systems, with the goal of furthering my understanding of what's important to people. Oftentimes, these are listening sessions where I hear from people. They also are asking that I share the vision similar to the kind of things we're talking about today. And I have to say, not everyone is in 100% agreement with all the things we talked about today, but the fact that we're talking about it, I think, is an improvement, because we slowly move a system forward by starting the dialogue. So any dialogue to me is good dialogue, even if we're not 100% aligned at this time. As we examine the OCHN support models, we need to remain focused on our ultimate goal, and our ultimate goal is not just to help people have great services or a great plan in their file. Our ultimate goal is to have people have great lives, and that's why we'll stay focused on these big life impact things: housing, employment, community connections, belonging, wellness, all these things, being healthy and connected and all that. Having great lives is our focus. So we need to make sure that the way that we are measuring success is measuring based on a standard for anyone in society as a service system. And sometimes we've measured success based on disability-specific measures. And are the check boxes checked? And are the T's crossed and the I's dotted? We know we get audited by the state, and a lot of times more on process-driven outcomes. And we want to make sure we're measuring ourselves based on outcomes for people we serve. So we're hoping to get more data in front of you that directly relates to people we serve and the outcomes in their lives. We also got to make sure that we don't confuse high satisfaction survey results with good quality life, just like the rest of the community. It's well known in the data that even our institutions had very high satisfaction ratings when folks lived in institutional care, and of course we know that that was not the ideal setting. So we can't automatically say because people are satisfied, that means the services or the models or the programs are resulting in high quality of life. There is a difference. We want to make sure that the way we're measuring is no different from how we would measure a quality of life for other people, either with disabilities or abilities of different, I'm trying to think of a better way to say it, Malkaya, we're going to have to think this through, or those pursuing recovery, right? We want to have the same standard for all people. Those kind of things generally for all people are folks want to control their front door. You want to control when someone knocks at your door, whether you let them in or not. We support a lot of people who don't have that option. So these kind of things, whether people have the opportunity to earn income, opportunity is key there, to have long-term loving relationships, valued roles in their community, and of course, the opportunities and assistance to have purpose and meaning in one's life. So therefore, when we design service models and we're talking about payment methodologies, you will hear more and more conversation about what we call real life quality outcomes, right? Things that matter to everyday people in real life. So together we are stronger, and we know the changes being made at OCHN are not solely being made because we want to be compliant with federal regulations, and they're not solely being made because we want to comply with our contract and what the state tells us what to do. The changes being made are being made because we want the people we serve to have great lives. We want to be innovative. We want to engage in the tough conversations, not because a funder told us to, but because they're the right conversations to have. We acknowledge that transformational work can at times or can be very time-consuming. All of our staff can tell you that. It would be easier to do nothing. It would be easier to maintain the status quo and just sit back and wait and see what the compliance regulations tell us to do. That's not who we are. We're innovative. We want to be on top of things. We want to implement models that have the best outcomes for people's lives. We also have to acknowledge that uncertainty is often part of a change process. It comes with change, that there is often some uncertainty and discomfort. But fortunately, we have the staff and the partners, and we're all dedicated to doing what is right. Even if the process itself is challenging, and change is so challenging, I don't want to discount that. In the end, positive outcomes for those we serve make everything worth it. So on behalf of myself and on behalf of the OCHN staff, and of course also the board of directors, we want to thank our core provider agencies, and we want to thank our direct service provider agencies for their ongoing partnership, and especially with their ongoing collaboration with us throughout all of the changes that we have been implementing, whether it be contract structure, service models, payment methodologies, people first language, just to name a few. There's been no shortage of new initiatives being passed throughout our entire service system. And I know some of us are, heck, I've only been here like 2.5 months, and I'm like, whoa, we are fast-paced, right? So it's not lost on me that we're pushing for a lot of change fast, and we are starting to have some dialogues about that. How much is reasonable to expect people to do, right? We're talking about that because we do not want to burn out a highly, highly capable and a highly, highly dedicated workforce and provider network. Your commitment to always keeping the people we support is our top priority in every discussion we have, in every decision we make, is greatly appreciated. It's noticed, and that's what we will intend to do as your partners. And we know that our provider network and our staff will do just that. Thank you.
Well, that's the most comprehensive and fastest delivered director's report we've ever had.
I was trying to talk fast so we can get out of here.
Well, you have to hold on a few more minutes. I don't believe we have any other business, but this is our second opportunity for public comment, if anybody would like to make such. I don't see anyone. Do you have any further comments?
No further comments.
Okay. Board member comments. Ms. Newman.
I have a question for Annette. You mentioned in one of your updates that you wanted us to turn in the Chromebooks if we're not using them. My question to you is, if we do that, will we have another way of accessing the dashboards?
Yeah, I was told that any internet access on any computer, you can access the dashboards. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we are collecting all the Chromebooks. It's if you're not using them, we might as well disperse them to other people because not everybody's using them. But any internet connection can get you on the dashboards without having the Chromebook specifically.
Okay, any other? I have some comments that I would like to make. And this is related to the fact that next month is our organizational meeting. And it's hard for me to believe, but as of March in 2019, I will have served on this board for 18 years. And it has truly been an outstanding experience, but I've decided it's time for me to move on. And given that I'm retiring from the board in March, I will not stand for election as board chair at our organizational meeting next month. And I want to emphasize, it has been a true privilege to serve on this board and an honor to serve as its board chair. And I want to send out some special thanks to certain board members who've been so supportive during my tenure as chair. They've provided encouragement, wise counsel, and they thanked me for my leadership. And that was particularly true when I had to face some difficult issues. These board members know who they are, and I have thanked them along the way and will do so again as I leave the position of chair. I also want to thank the leadership team and staff of OCHN. I have the highest regard for you. When I sum up my feelings about the leadership and staff, I think of you as highly skilled professionals who are dedicated, hardworking, innovative, and just plain brilliant. You work around the clock almost always, and you usually have a smile on your face, which says to me it's clear you enjoy your work and you're committed. And please excuse me, I didn't expect to get emotional. So I thank all of you for what you do to make the public mental health system work and improve on a daily basis. So in October, I will call the board meeting to order and conduct the election of the new chair and then turn the gavel over to that person. I look forward to finishing my term through March, and I will always have very fond memories of my work on this board. So thank you. And unless there are other comments, the meeting's adjourned.
Eddie, are we having a study session?
No, I have no agenda for it.